G'day, mate. 40 here. So Kamala Harris didn't get married until she was in her menopausal years. What's going on with that? She's an attractive woman. She had the opportunity to meet a lot of powerful men. She had that affair with Willie Brown when Willie Brown was married. Kamala Harris served as his mistress. That's how she got a start in politics. Why didn't she get married, though? And does that provide us any insight into what kind of president Kamala Harris might become? So from my reading on Kamala Harris, her number one trait that stands out to me is insecurity, because it's a trait that I have often shared myself. And it just seems to be such a powerful explanatory variable for understanding what's otherwise seems kind of incomprehensible. Her weird public behavior, the word salad, right? The insecurity, the tendency to freeze. And here is J.D. Vance talking about women who don't have kids. So sometimes that provides a lot of insight.
I'd say that I have fully developed views on this, but to me what it is sort of a value system to replace the fact that they're all fundamentally atheist or agnostic. They have no real value system. Their only value system is achieve in a very conventional way. And so the idea that somehow they're pursuing racial or gender equity is like the value system that gives their life meaning. Well, of course, they all find that value system leads to misery, leads to unhappiness. And so I think that what happens is, like, whenever you really pursue something, right? Like let's say a doctor gives you a medicine to cure a disease and it doesn't work, right? The patient gets worse. Well, you can conclude one of two things. Either the medicine isn't working, or the patient was so sick that what they need is even more of the medicine that you originally prescribed. And I think the gender inequity stuff is like, we need more of the medicine. Okay, clearly this value set has made me a miserable person who can't have kids because I already, passed the biological period when it was possible. And I live in a 1,200 square foot apartment in New York and I pay $5,000 a month for it. But I'm really better than these other people. What I'm gonna do is project my racial and gender sensitivities on the rest of them. And the reason that our society is broken is because these people don't think the exact way that I think. Even though the way that I think has made me a miserable person, I just need to make more people think like that. So we're going to teach this in our schools, in our universities, even in our elementary schools, because once everybody agrees with me, then everything will finally come full circle and we'll have a happy, healthy society.
So obviously that's not true for everyone who does not have kids. Everyone does have a tendency, however, to try to frame their own choices as the best possible choices, the most admirable. J.D. Vance chose to have a lot of children, not so much for Kamala Harris, right? But she does seem reasonably happy getting married, and that was J.D. Vance primarily there analyzing Lesbian Teachers Union President Randy Weingarten. All right, that's who JD had in mind. He wasn't talking about Kamala Harris in that clip. And so Steve Saylor's got an interesting post up on Substack that just landed a couple of hours ago. Most married men these days get their attitudes about female behavior from their wives. JD Vance is married to a brilliant Indian-American Yale Law School graduate who has chosen to have 3 children. Paul Newman, the actor, said that he determined the Newman family's standpoint on the big issues such as nuclear disarmament and the Law of the Sea Treaty, while his wife, Joanne Woodward, decided minor stuff, such as where they'd live and what school their kids would go to. All of this raises the question of, why didn't Kamala Harris ever get married until a couple of months short of her 50th birthday? And when she finally did get married, she did okay. She snagged a well-paid lawyer on the rebound from causing his divorce by knocking up the nanny, talking about Doug Emhoff. And she seems to have found her decade of marriage agreeable. But of course, her wedding came far too late for her to have a baby. Now, why she didn't manage to find a husband earlier seems like an interesting question without an obvious answer. After all, Kamala is heterosexual. She is pleasant looking. She is feminine. She is sociable. She's devoted to her college sorority. She is short. She's only 5'2", so you'd think that she would not have difficult, demanding height requirements in a man. And she's apparently a good cook. Kamala Harris is pretty basic. And that's a quality that's usually useful at getting married, right? The base model woman and the base model man evolved to be reasonably well cut out for each other. right? Maybe your Isaac Newtons and your Emily Dickinsons are just too complicated to made up easily, but Kamala is your pretty standard ex-sorority girl. And it's only the dumbness of American politics that has made her into a major party nominee for president, right? The Democrats would never have chosen her under different circumstances. And it should not have been hard for Kamala to find a husband. For example, her younger sister, Maya, has been married for over a quarter of a century to a fellow Stanford law graduate, even though Maya has been a single mother since 1984 when she was just 17. I am not aware of any long-term boyfriends that Kamala had that might have taken up several years of her prime and then not married her. She famously had affairs with Willie Brown in 1994-95 when she was around 30, and Montel Williams for a few months in 2001 when she was around 36. And then she went on a blind date with a current husband, Douglas Emhoff, in 2013 when she was about 48, and she got married in 2014. That's all I can find. Did she have an unmentioned long-term boyfriend who took up many of her best years but then, say, ultimately died? I remember the one girlfriend that I had who died, Christine. She was bitter that after a year I broke up with her, and she said, "You were my last chance to have kids." So she was about 41 when we broke up. I know a lady who never got married largely because her two most serious boyfriends died. So in life, a lot of randomly bad things can happen to you. Did her unknown boyfriend leave her for a younger woman? Or would he not ultimately leave his wife? Right? These seem like plausible reasons why Kamala did not get married, but she's never explained that lapse. But who knows? Maybe she was long set on marrying a black husband, but she couldn't find any up to her standards. That could be embarrassing. Or maybe her being half Tamil Brahmin complicated matters. Perhaps her sister's mysterious single motherhood, right? The father's name has never been made public, weirded Kamala out in some way. One obvious reason that it took Kamala so long to get married is that she is enormously ambitious, right? She's running for president after all, and careers can get in the way of romance and having children. So let's get a brief hit here from David Goldman talking to Carolyn Glick.
And China. It was not necessary. It could have gone otherwise. In 2008, when the Ukraine crisis was first brewing, I published an analysis saying that we basically had a choice with Russia. If we push them to the wall over Ukraine, their obvious move would be to ally with our enemies, starting with Iran. If, on the other hand, we found some kind of deal with Russia over Ukraine, which would have meant Ukrainian neutrality and protection for the Russian minority in Ukraine, we could have extracted from Russia a concession to help us with Iran, which is a prospective nuclear terrorist state. And the question I ask is, which is more important for American interests? Regime change in Ukraine, regime change in Russia, or the possibility of nuclear terrorism in the Middle East. And my strong view would have been that we should have found a way to deal with Russia over Ukraine and gotten their cooperation over Iran. That was on the table. It no longer is. So there is a three-way alliance, but there are strong limits to it because everyone has intersecting and divergent interests. A Chinese commentary a couple of weeks ago in a website called Observer, which frequently represents state council views, said Iran should not try to fight Israel. It can't fight Israel. The air defense it has is primitive. They're old Russian S-300s, and the Russians are not going to give them the kind of air defense that might be able to deal with the countermeasures carried by, say, an Israeli F-15, let alone a stealth aircraft like F-35.
Okay, I learned a lot from this David Goldman commentary on the Carolyn Glick show. I'll return to it later. But let's get back to this excellent Steve Saylor Substack post that landed this morning. Most presidential timber quality women manage to combine a husband and at least one child. For example, Nancy Pelosi is a successful politician. She had 5 kids. Maybe Kamala couldn't close the husband deal for a quarter of a century because in person, perhaps Kamala doesn't always spread joy to those near and not so dear to her, the way the press has kept telling you for the last month that she is spreading joy across America. So this is Politico back in 2021. Headline, not a healthy environment. Kamala Harris's office rife with dissent. There's dysfunction inside the vice president's office, aides and administration officials say, and it's emanating from the top because whenever Kamala Harris is running an office, it always has dissension and dysfunction and low morale. So in interviews, 22 current and former vice presidential aides, administration officials, and associates of Harris and Biden describe a tense and at times dour office atmosphere. Right? That does not sound filled with joy. Much of the ire is aimed at Kamala Harris's chief. Two administration officials said the vice president bears responsibility for the way the office is run. It all starts at the top. People are thrown under the bus from the top. There are short fuses. It's an abusive environment. It's not a healthy environment. People feel mistreated. It's not a place where people feel supported, but a place where people feel like they're treated badly. For some of the people who know Harris best, it's become an all too familiar pattern for a politician who has churned through several iterations of staff on her rise, and she took office with a team almost entirely new to her because she can't seem to sustain people working for her. So when I was out looking for a job, essentially in the interviewing process, what the typical question from potential employers is, oh, do you have any questions for us? And I'd want to know how long people worked at a particular place, right? If a particular work site wasn't able to keep employees, that's a big warning sign. So the Kamala Harris staff situation was basically the same as the staff situation on the Armando Iannucci sitcom Veep, with Julia Louis-Dreyfus as Selena Meyer, an in-over-ahead vice president, except that Selena, unlike Kamala, managed to keep her funniest staffers around season after season. Back to the Politico article. Harris's struggles are nothing new. People who've worked for her in the past describe days as managed chaos. The boss's expectations won't always be predictable. So from my time as an employee, when I worked for someone who was organized, things generally worked in an organized fashion, and I was able to operate in an organized fashion. When I worked for a boss who was chaotic, there was absolutely nothing I could do to effectively manage or tame the chaos emanating from the boss. So the way an office works is largely a reflection of the habits and practices and personality of the person in charge. Kamala Harris's presidential campaign imploded in a painful maze of finger pointing and leaks. Kamala Harris jettisoned nearly everyone from that campaign and returned to the Senate in 2020 with her government staff in a small outside political operation in tow. When she was put on the presidential ticket, she was given a staff of mostly handpicked trusted aides from Biden world, and it did the job, right? That team during the 2020 election avoided her typical spiral of internal backbiting. But the pressure-packed vice president's office has been a different story, and it hasn't helped that few of her aides have any familiarity with her, and not with her chief of staff when they started their jobs. So the morale level for current Harris staffers is rough, similar to that of the failed presidential campaign and her Senate office. Right? Harris excels with those around her, project calm and order, creating a sense of confidence and certainty. When people feed her anxieties, all of that goes away, exacerbating the bad tendencies. So Steve Saylor comments, Kamala is intensely cringe. Longer profile in The Atlantic from October 10, 2023, the Kamala Harris problem. Few people seem to think that she's ready to be president. Why? So I resonate with much of this stuff because when I moved to America at age 11 and entered 6th grade at Pacific Union College in the Napa Valley, the most common word that people would use to describe me was insecure, and it was accurate. Looking at the chat. Kamala has a reputation as a bitch on wheels. Kamala is married to a wine bottle. Isn't focusing on those aspects of Kamala Harris's personal life a counterproductive diversion? Wouldn't keeping focus on her apparent inebriation, insecurity, and other concerns more directly, more clearly relevant to her competence to serve as president be a better approach? Will a Kamala presidency be similar to the first Trump presidency in that people will be rotated all the time? Well, I will say again and again and again, Donald Trump is not good at running things, and he tends to bring chaos wherever he goes. But Donald Trump does have people who've worked for him for decades, right? Kamala Harris does not have that. So the level of chaos, it appears, in Kamala operations far exceeds that of Donald Trump. So, Atlantic Magazine, 2023, few people seem to think that Kamala's ready to be president. Why? And the journalist says, the vice president's residence has been redecorated. Harris seemed to enjoy it, showing me around. In the turret room, she pointed to the banquet seating built along the curves. I just love circles, she said. Right? Put 3 circles together in a Venn diagram, and Kamala is in ecstasy. She gestured at the art. We moved into the library with its collection of books devoted to the vice presidency. Who knew there were so many? Steve says, but where are the vice president's books, right? What does Kamala like to read? And Saylor's commentary on this Atlantic piece is Kamala Harris appears to be a nervous wreck. She appears to suffer, not unreasonably, from imposter syndrome. Right, that's a really good analysis there by Steve Saylor, imposter syndrome. So I caught on to the insecurity, but imposter syndrome is an even more precise way of expressing it. What the heck is imposter syndrome? This is Stanford Medicine YouTube page. Come on, man. Get to the commentary. Oh, it's just... That's not very helpful. Just a bunch of music.
2 things have happened to me lately. The first of which is pretty cool, and that is that this channel, thanks to who are at this level in their career, talk about imposter syndrome, makes me realize that the success variable and the feelings of inadequacy variable are completely independent. They're not linked. You could have so much evident success to be in movie after movie after movie, and it wouldn't do anything about that feeling. So it makes sense for us to explore the variables separately, and that's what this video is going to do. But before we do that, I want to give you a metaphor. When you are young, it spits out mostly shit. Because you're young and you don't quite understand craft. That's normal. But we're not told it's normal, so we look at our buckets and they're full of shit. And then we look at somebody who's incredible and we go, why is your bucket full of diamonds? I must just have a broken machine. I must not be good. At this point, a lot of people will get discouraged and never pull that lever again. Then one day they turn 45, have a midlife crisis, and realize that they could have pulled the lever the entire time. But should you find yourself lucky enough to push past the discouragement of others and the discouragement of seeing other people's diamonds, that you continue pulling the lever, one day...
Okay, that's not helpful. Sorry. I should have done more research on imposter syndrome. Right, 6 signs you might have imposter syndrome. This better have words in it.
Psych2Go's mission is to make psychology more accessible to...
Come on.
And before we begin, we'd also like success. A sign of imposter syndrome is attributing your success to external forces instead of acknowledging your abilities. In 1978, Clance and Emez interviewed successful women at the top of their fields and found that many of them felt that their success was due to luck or mistake rather than their own hard work. 2. You're a perfectionist or a procrastinator. Do you wait until the last minute to complete your work or put more time and effort into a project than necessary to make something perfect? If you have imposter syndrome, you may turn to procrastination and perfectionism as coping mechanisms for your feelings of inadequacy. You may wait until the last minute to start working or constantly overwork yourself so you can attribute your success to luck or hard work instead of your own abilities. 3.
So your reputation with yourself is going to shine out, right? If you don't respect yourself, other people are going to pick up on that and treat you with a lack of respect.
You're afraid of being exposed as a fake.
And this is probably pretty accurate for Kamala Harris.
Do you usually feel anxious and scared?
Right. If you were chosen on the basis of being black or a woman, right, instead of on the basis of competence, it would make sense that you might have imposter syndrome.
That your peers will realize you're a fake. Even famous American poet and author Maya Angelou was scared she'd be found as a fake whenever she published a new book. This is due to imposter syndrome being linked to low self-confidence.
And low self-confidence is going to reflect your own relationship with yourself. All right, back to this excellent Steve Saylor essay. The father of one of her interns recounted, and I gave you this story last week, never once during my son's month-long internship did Kamala Harris ever introduce herself. Right, this was in an office with only 20 employees. Staff were too intimidated by her to introduce him. The only acknowledgement of his service was a form letter of thanks. And my son was given instructions to never address Kamala Harris nor look her in the eye. This privilege to look at Kamala Harris was only allowed to senior staff members. So it's hardly unreasonable for Kamala Harris to lack confidence that she deserves to be president. After all, she's kind of a ditz. That's Steve Saylor's conclusion. Now, when did people first start remarking that Kamala Harris appeared drunk in public? So I searched X, and I find comments on Twitter going back to 2017. Right, this is a post from 2017, January 12. Senator Kamala Harris, Democrat, California. Was she drunk or what? And this is a comment on a public grilling of the CIA director nominee over climate change. And this is a this is a video slowed down to 50% to make an exaggerated point. So it is a distorted video, but does the distortion make a point?
Because I love Bootsy. I Funkadelic. Are you kidding me? I'm sure a man could do the job just as well. Lawrence, I don't even.
Okay, again, these videos are distorted, but is the distortion pointing to a truth?
Know what I'm having for dinner.
Okay. Senator Kamala Harris, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
I have an herb garden. I go to Soul Psych like twice a week.
All right, this is a video compilation put together 6 years ago. All right, post here from January of 2019. Is Kamala Harris drunk in this video?
Build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails. And we walk around everywhere. Build more schools. We protest. Build more schools, less jails. Put money into education, not prisons. Build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails. And we walk around everywhere. Build more schools. We protest. Build more schools, less jails. Put money into education, not prisons. Build more schools.
Okay, July 24, 2019. Why does Kamala Harris always sound drunk? Matt Walsh, public commentator, September 2019. Kamala is drunk as hell. And there were numerous tweets on September 12, 2019. There must have been a Democratic debate. Kamala is drunk as hell. Bernie lost his voice. This is a debate. Another post, same date. Kamala sounds drunk. Same date. Pretty convinced Kamala is drunk. There are tweet after tweet from September 12, 2019 with people suggesting that Kamala is drunk. Now we've got a post from August 12, 2019. Kamala the drunk just lied to this woman. So this is August 2019.
Can I ask you a question? Yes, of course. I understand that you are advocating health care for everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Who's going to pay for it?
Well, we're going to pay for it because right now, let me tell you something, we're all paying for health care for everyone, and it's in an emergency room. Okay. Okay, I don't intend to do you have Medicare? Okay, well, I want to make sure your health care is the way you like it, so I'll promise you that, okay? I won't mess with the health care that you have. Are you on Medicare? Okay. Well, it was nice to visit with you. Thank you for the time. Okay.
All right, more commentary. All right, this is a video speculating she's drunk from 2022. Go home, Kamala, you're drunk.
I think culture is a reflection of our moment in our time, right? And present culture is the way we express how we're feeling about the moment. And we should always find times to express how we feel about the moment that is a reflection of joy, because you know, it comes in the morning. We have to find ways to also express the way we feel about the moment in terms of just having language and a connection to how people are experiencing life. And I think about it in that way, too.
So you would expect Republicans to be hostile to Kamala Harris and to try to tear her down, but often people who are hostile to you and trying to tear you down will hit on truths your friends and family might want to ignore. And so back in 2019, Republicans were frequently publicly commenting, Joe Biden seems senile. And they were right? He was demonstrating signs of senility going back to 2018. 2019, Kamala Harris gave one of her patented half-drunk word salad speeches. Nicole Wallace was pretty pumped up afterwards.
Yeah. All right, she's starting. All right, let's let her start.
South Carolina. Oh, it's good to be in the Palmetto State. Thank you all. Oh, thank you. I just want to start by thanking you, South Carolina Democrats, because y'all have been holding it down. You've been doing what needs to get done. And we know how to do the critical work that must be done every day to make sure that we get our message across and that we accomplish our goals, because we also know that in order to fight for the best of who we are and to fight for our values and see them reflected in our elected leaders, we know we must elect the right people.
And Kamala Harris is just that woman that he couldn't even get to look at her. She's beautiful.
Yeah.
She's brilliant. Yeah. She's a badass. She's stronger than him. She's tougher than him. She's smarter than him. And she's just the kind of woman that would never turn her head and even know who he was as sort of a C-level reality TV figure.
So what is your experience with public figures being accused of being drunk in public, and then they come up with an excuse? No, they were on ear medication or something else. Usually the celebrity is lying and they were drunk or under the influence of benzodiazepines. On the other hand, occasionally people come across as drunk, but they are not drunk. They have something physiologically going on with them that gives them the appearance of being drunk. But usually when it comes to celebrities and they're accused of being intoxicated in public, when they're accused of being under the influence of some substance in public, and the celebrity denies it, usually the celebrity is lying. But there's an excellent point from Bob Outberger. If Kamala is drunk all the time, why haven't we caught her being flat out drunk, like puking, yelling, sleeping in public or something? She's been a functional drunk for many years, right? There are functional alcoholics. There are functional drunks, right? There are many drinkers who exercise sufficient control to avoid the kind of scenes that you mentioned. I dated a high-functioning alcoholic, and you did not see her puking or sleeping in public, right? You just saw a lot of behavior such as Kamala Harris just demonstrated. So I keep going back to conservatives noting that Joe Biden appeared senile back in 2019. And then that was only seriously covered by the news media after Joe Biden's disastrous June 27 debate with Donald Trump. We had 3 books published on the Biden administration that did not deal with his workload, his work hours, whether he was cognitively up to his job. All right, completely ignored the issue. There was no academic coverage of the issue. There was minimal media coverage of the issue. Liberals were essentially blinded to Joe Biden's obvious senility by their own speech codes, that it's not a very nice thing to make those kind of personal remarks. So what does Kamala Harris's freedom agenda mean? So Democrats have now rebranded themselves as the Party of Freedom. So one of the smartest political podcasts is that put on by Reason Magazine. So let's get a quick clip here.
M.E. Minding your own damn business, which sounds great to me. I wonder if style emotions that were welling up inside of you. It was joy. Also, in a surprise twist, freedom. Democrats have now rebranded, however improbably, as the Party of Freedom, or in the...
So Matt Welch has been a longtime friend because his wife, Emmanuelle Richard, wrote the first profile of me for Online Journalism Review in the summer of 1998, and he drove her to the interview. And then after she conducted the interview, I came outside. Matt was still waiting in their car, and we started chatting. And perhaps I didn't possess the best judgment, but shortly after I shook Matt's hand, I asked him what did he like to think about when he masturbated. And I think he ducked the question. I think he lacked the courage of his convictions. But he's a very funny, very sharp guy. And he and his wife were wonderful friends to me for years, till they left Los Angeles about 15 years ago.
The words of vice presidential pick, Minnesota governor, and COVID authoritarian Tim Walz, minding your own damn business, which sounds great to me. I wonder if there's any catch to that. By freedom, the party of Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren mostly meant the freedom to control one's reproductive decision.
And I want to add this. I'm embarrassed. Like, I ran into Matt at a Reason magazine party in, I think, early 2016. And then I made a tweet or two directed at him, and he blocked me. My God, my longtime friend blocked me. And that was before I was medicated for ADHD. So I get on the nerves of my friends. I mean, it bothers me, not in the sense that he did something wrong. It bothers me that I was so unnecessarily obnoxious to someone who'd been a good friend to me. So I've had no interaction with Matt since 2016.
The possibility of marrying whatever non-relative adult you choose to, and to have unfettered access to most books in school libraries, maybe not, and cultures. Inside the United Arena, where I spent most of the time, the joy was palpable, especially after the old man president, Joseph Robinette Biden II, was ushered gently off stage after a barky speech on Monday night. Democrats, for sure, feel relief that they no longer have to pretend that he's a particularly good candidate or that he's sharp as a tack. And now, after having bathed in the holy speechifying glow of Oprah Winfrey and Barack and Michelle Obama, they are now trying to convince the rest of us that their relief is our joy. Meanwhile, though, the betting markets, they have this race at a push. It's dead even, according to Polymarket, even a little Trump ahead, 50-49. Kamala Harris is up 1.5 points in the national polling averages, but in the battleground states, it's about half and half, with Kamala taking the North and Trump taking the South. So, Catherine, at these events now more than ever, there's no news at all, and they're basically infomercials designed for the viewing audience at home. That means
how painful do you find it when, say, a family member blocks you on social media? Have you experienced that? How painful do you find it when a friend blocks you on social media? This kind of stuff happens to me way too often. Right? These ruptures really hurt. And I don't put any of the blame on the other parties. All right. I understand that my own provocative behavior causes this, right? It causes people with whom I've often had long, friendly relations to just get tired of me, right? I test people way too much. I provoke people way too much. I don't listen to their cues. So I remember I had a new friend, and I loved this guy. He was great. He was just so smart and so accomplished. It was intoxicating to talk to him. And when I get intoxicated, I get giddy. And when I get giddy, I make a lot of jokes. And when I would make a lot of jokes, I would offend him. And I just ignored all the signs that I was offending him until he publicly blew up at me and just dressed me down in front of other people in the workplace. It was incredibly embarrassing. And it just blew up the friendship because for weeks previous, I had just ignored his signs that I was getting on his nerves, that my jokes were offending him. And it kills me that I blew up that friendship. It kills me.
You. So what did you, libertarian person, see? What did you feel? And what did you learn?
I saw the silent presence of ChatGPT in so many of those speeches. Like every single one of them could have been, and I think many of them likely were, written either by or with the assistance of AI. And I look forward to the expose on that that will come someday in the distant future. They were so generic. They were so bland. It really was, message discipline on display. I don't know why I do this every year, but I do feel this like weird sacred obligation to tune in at like 6 p.m. and watch every single lieutenant governor say, and in conclusion, fight for Kamala. And it's just horrific every time. But there's something that feels like I've done it before and I have to keep doing it in order to keep my baseline the same for my cynicism survey. So yes, the triumph of AI. And then, as you mentioned, the freedom messaging, which I think we can talk about a little bit more, but I feel like Isaiah Berlin was just rolling in his grave as we wildly conflated freedom from and freedom to, no regard at all for the fact that they were in fact incompatible. It was sad because I was like, oh, look, someone's talking about freedom. And then it was like, they mean not at all what I mean by it.
I'm just thinking now of another bloke that I met in LA. We went for a long, enjoyable walk. And then I think at some point I must have asked him, what do you like to think about when you masturbate? And he just didn't answer my calls after that. Maybe that's not a good question to ask people. I'm sensing.
Unfortunately.
Freedom to the right to housing, as Tim Walz.
Do not feel sad about Donald Trump. Freedom to have your abortions paid for by nuns. I mean, it was just a lot on that front.
Peter, as a nun abortionist? No, that's not a really good transition.
So Nick Gillespie, upper right here, I got to do a little boasting. I believe this is accurate. Nick said that I was a more frightening interviewer, more intimidating interviewer than anyone else, or more so than Bill O'Reilly. So I've interviewed Nick at least once, maybe twice. I'd love to interview him again. He's a great gentleman. We used to run in the same social circles between circa 2005, 2006.
But as someone who pays attention to
so Nick was the longtime editor of Reason magazine. I believe he has a PhD in English literature, and he's been an editor at large at Reason since about 2007.
Economics.
You got to stop doing transitions like that with the nuns in particular. It's just a bad habit.
We're just going to pause. No, tell us a little.
So how much money have my provocations cost me over the course of my lifetime? So I'm pretty sure that my blogging and live streaming have cost me well north of $1 million, and countless romantic opportunities. On the other hand, I've had romantic opportunities and financial and other opportunities because of my blogging and live streaming. But it's when you provoke people, all right, you're usually hurting them. Therapists, it took them a long time to get this through to me. All right, when you offend someone, you're hurting them. When you provoke someone, you're hurting them. And since I was a little kid, I have long taken just devilish delight in provoking people. And I just love getting people wound up. I used to do this to Christians about back lacing in rock music lyrics or whatever were the key fixations, and I'd just wind them up. Or I'd ask people, what do you think about Desmond Ford? And often I'd ask Seventh-day Adventists. Obviously, no one outside of Adventism knew who my dad was. And I'd wind them up, and then I'd go, oh, he's my father, which is a really dirty trick to do to people.
I respect for that joke, which was, it died in the womb.
Oh, no.
I just hope it was a womb with a view.
A womb with a view. So, unfortunately, I did most of this provocation when I was feeling good, right? I had to be at a certain level of giddiness to launch into this provocation. When I was feeling depressed and insecure, I did not engage. So here's a pattern that I got into between 1994 and 1997. I was often way too solitary during the week. And so on Friday night, when I had an invite to a Shabbat dinner, I just became giddy. When I became giddy, I became over the top. I went back to this one rabbi's home, and I got into an argument with him about the role of faith and love and humility in Judaism versus Christianity. So I was trying to make the point that what was primary in Judaism was secondary in Christianity, and what was primary in Christianity was secondary in Judaism. But somehow I was so obnoxious about it, meaning that law is primary in Judaism, faith, humility is primary in Christianity. But I was so obnoxious about it that apparently I made the rabbi's daughter cry. Oh, I did this a lot. Another time I offended the host because I sat in his chair. Because the man of the table, often in Orthodox Judaism, right, that's his chair. You don't sit in it. And I went and sat in it. And I offended enough people that my Shabbat dinner invites severely declined. And then I tried to justify myself, but everyone was laughing. And then people would point out, yeah, but they were laughing with that kind of nervous, pained laugh. Shabbat afternoon at a pool, and I was seated next to a young man about my age, around 30, and his head was shaven like mine. And I said, oh, wow, the only people I know with their head shaved have cancer. He had cancer. And I was not invited back to that home. And speaking head and stuff, I spent a lot of time in the sun yesterday wearing my yarmulke. So I got this big white spot on the top of my head, and then everything around it is red. So tell it not to the uncircumcised in Gath.
Peter, can you tell us about the freedom content of the economic messaging in particular?
Yeah, it wasn't very freedomy. There was a lot of it, like you saw the word freedom all over, but that's what all you got here was you saw the word freedom. And there was so little policy substance to this.
Yeah, so if I had to do it all over again, I'd try to calibrate my behavior to both the situation and the person. So sometimes I really tried to, I'd be way over the top with our friend Bob here in the chat. And then I'd get nervous that I'd become obnoxious, and I'd want to check in with him to see if I had offended him. And he says I've never offended him. But on the other hand, he just completely went off social media for about a year. And maybe I'd offended him.
And that was on purpose. You asked Catherine, what did we learn? And I think the answer is we didn't learn one damn thing. And that was intentional, because Democrats decided to run on hour after hour of pablum, of just like empty rhetoric, right?
Okay, Times Now News has an article on Kamala appearing drunk.
He even called for termination of the United States Supreme, the supreme land of our nation, the United States Constitution.
All right, so this was in Georgia, and she does sound intoxicated here.
He even called for termination of the United States Supreme, the supreme land of our nation, the United States Constitution.
Yeah, I had a lot of girlfriends also complained that I had a filthy mouth, that I was just unbelievably dirty. Not a good trait. Okay, so what is the freedom agenda? And what is the joy agenda? So linguist John McWhorter wrote in the New York Times, August 29th, joy is a euphemism for a word no one wants to say out loud. No one's talking about what joy is really based on and how it could let us down in the end. Right? A good deal of the joy people keep talking about is a result of one fact, that Kamala Harris is black, or she's 1/4 black, 1/4 Irish, and half Brahmin Indian. There's absolutely nothing about Kamala Harris that justifies her being treated as a once-in-a-generation phenom or savior. This is not about substance. This is about optics. Harris is being received on the basis of a category she fits into rather than who she is. The thing sweeping so many people up is the idea that her being black, and a black woman at that, would shape her presidency. Now, Barack Obama was a black president. It's hard to see how it ended up making anything better. There is no reason to believe that Kamala Harris's color will be any more significant than Obama's was if she becomes president. And freedom, right? Freedom is just a word that people say when they have nothing left to lose. Right? Freedom can never mean anything more than freedom to act and speak according to one's hero system. And any other quality ascribed to freedom is just rhetoric. The free world during the Cold War was that part of the world largely aligned with America's dominant political hero system, which it largely inherited from England. So entire categories such as true and false, right and wrong, good taste and bad taste, sense and nonsense, weird and normal, right? They depend largely upon one's hero system. Right? The position of the observer is an integral part of the data. For example, I am conservative. I react to the world in predictable ways. I judge the world in predictable ways. So freedom, right? It boils down to freedom is entirely dependent on the nature of one's hero system.
Totally empty, shallow platitudes. And that was the choice that they explicitly made. There was not even like a pretense like, oh no, there's actually a lot of substance here. No, they were like, you're gonna vote for empty.
Right, there's no party of freedom. There's no platform of freedom independent of particular hero systems.
Platitudes. You're gonna vote for not very much substance. And so before the DNC, Kamala Harris gave a long speech in North Carolina where she outlined an economic agenda, including things like $40 billion in loans to help spur on building housing, and $25,000 in federal assistance for certain qualified homeowners for down payments. And of course, there was the price gouging bans, which may or may not be price controls. And I say may or may not, because we don't know, but also the Harris team doesn't know. They're not telling us. They're not putting out the details, and they're letting people argue about it because they don't care. They don't care one way or another what the actual policy is.
So I'm on my once-a-week cup of coffee this morning, and I feel great. The world looks entirely different when you're caffeinated, and that caffeinated state is a relative rarity in your life. I mean, it really rockets you into a new dimension. It gives you much more strength, creativity, energy, confidence. The world just seems completely different in my caffeinated state. Right. Merrill Matthews writes for The Hill, August 27th. The overriding theme at the Democratic convention was freedom, but don't be fooled. Democratic strategists made it clear months ago they shifted to the freedom theme as a marketing strategy because it sells well. Now, why does the freedom message sell well? I didn't know this. Wall Street Journal's Molly Ball reported last December, abortion rights advocates have changed their message. Right? Supporters of abortion access have emphasized freedom and values in successful campaigns in red-leaning states. Abortion rights activists rarely use the term pro-choice anymore. They prefer to talk about people's freedom to decide. Right? One Democrat tells Molly Ball, the messaging we were using was not working, and we knew we had to get at deeper emotions versus what people say they think. Democrats discovered the term freedom resonated with lots of people, especially with independents and seniors. Now, this change in messaging is not changing people's minds against their will. It is eliciting responses in people that were buried under previous messages that simply weren't activating people. So one Democratic pollster says Democrats can seize on the success of the freedom message and then tie it to other issues, such as Republicans' attempts to limit books in school libraries. Well, all civilizations limit children and their access to books and to pictures. So it's a really bizarre platform to campaign against book banning when book banning is in public school libraries, right? What's appropriate for children. And Democrats are also tying in the freedom message to what is that gender reassignment treatment, but what's that language they use for transsexual surgeries? They don't call it mutilation, gender affirming treatment, I believe. So how do we know the Democrats are deceptively using the term freedom to sell their agenda? Because there are many fundamental freedoms they have no intention of allowing Americans to enjoy, such as health insurance. Right, Kamala Harris wants to abolish private health insurance, at least she said so in 2019. What about being free not to be vaccinated, free not to drive an electric vehicle, free not to send your children to public schools of the government's choosing, free to go to a church or synagogue during a pandemic, right? How about the freedom to compete in sports as a female against only those who are biologically female? So here's the interesting Molly Ball article, Wall Street Journal, December 30th, 2023. Shortly after November state-level elections affirmed voters' support for abortion rights in Kentucky, in Virginia, and Ohio, right? A Democratic pollster gave a webinar to deliver an analysis and a warning to a fellow progressives. Yes, it was clear that abortion was a winning issue, but it mattered how advocates talked about it. Right? Talk about this in the context of values widens our support. By values, she explained, she was principally talking about freedom. Right? A majority of people in these states answered yes to both, should we restore the rights that we had under Roe v. Wade? Right? So the rights to abort mean that women who are pregnant have the right to abort their baby at least in the first 3 months, but the baby has no rights, and the father has no rights, and the community and the nation have no rights. So one party gets rights and all the other parties lose their rights. Should personal decisions like abortion be up to women rather than the government? Right? This is a winning question. Right? This latter statement outperformed the former, where you explicitly invoke Roe v. Wade, by 19 percentage points. So it was the values language that allowed the Democrats to win by such big margins. So Democrats see abortion success as a crucial political asset, not only a way to drive turnout in the 2024 presidential election, but as a roadmap for appealing to voters' fundamental values on issues from the economy to education. One anti-abortion Republican consultant recently complained they stole freedom. And a similar linguistic and conceptual shift powered the public's increasing support of same-sex marriage, as advocates switched from talking about gay rights to talking about the universal values of love and commitment and the freedom to marry whomever one chooses. So Democrats should not assume that simply putting abortion on the ballot will automatically be a winner, but they can seize on the success of the freedom message and tie it to other issues, such as Republican attempts to limit books in school libraries or gender reassignment treatments, or even conservative policies on healthcare, taxes, and crime that liberals can argue circumscribe some people's autonomy. So the freedom argument's a winning argument for Democrats, just as it used to be a winning argument for Republicans. It speaks to a value, and it undercuts what used to be a Republican brand advantage, right? Republicans and their support for limited government were associated with freedom. Now, I've got this highly useful book for political discussion, and I'll get to it in a minute. Oh, shoot, I accidentally... Elliott, come back. Elliott, please, come back. You can blame it all on me. I was wrong, and I just can't stream without you. Elliott, come back, bro. Did I accidentally knock you out of the stream?
Of attack. Why was she refusing to talk to the media, to answer more than a couple of shouted questions, to do a single interview? But as she rose in the polls and held a star-studded convention, the vice president refused, and most of the mainstream media didn't much care. As the pressure built, Harris finally agreed to a sit-down, not with Oprah or Gayle King, but with CNN anchor Dana Bash, who had interviewed her several times. Much of the advanced criticism focused on her decision to include her running mate, Tim Walz.
The reality is she hasn't answered a single hard question, and now they finally signed up for some, and she's got to bring along an emotional support animal.
She should disabuse everyone of the notion that mainstream media gets to dictate when you get when you get an interview and how you get an interview.
Others assess the interview in advance.
This interview isn't going to reveal anything we don't already know about her. Expect this to be purely a puff piece.
Look, Donald Trump is out there doing interviews almost every day. Presidential candidates have a responsibility to talk to journalists, not because we're so important or self-important, but because that's how voters find out what you're made of. The vice president should do more of these so the public can see how she handles unscripted questions away from the teleprompter. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz.
Elliott, come back, bro. You can blame it all on me. I was wrong, and I just can't stream without you.
So how did Harris, Tim Walz, and Dana Bash handle the big interview?
You have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already?
Well, first of all, we had to recover as an economy, and we have done that.
Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020, that I would not ban fracking.
What made you change that position at the time?
Well, let's be clear. My values have not changed.
You raised your hand when asked whether or not the border should be decriminalized. Do you still believe that?
I believe there should be consequences.
And asked about Donald Trump,
he suggested that you happened to turn black recently for political purposes, questioning a core part of your identity.
Yeah.
Any
same old tired playbook. Next question.
Man, so Elliott was afraid that I was going to ask him what he thinks about when he masturbates, and so he hung up on me.
They knew that they would, Dana Bash would ask about the flip-flopping. They knew that they would ask about the gun business and all that other stuff. So they had answers. But they didn't always square with reality.
Look at what Kamala Harris is doing. She's doing this move that I think Jay-Z taught President Obama, which is this. Just diminish him.
We got more of what we already knew Kamala Harris was. I mean, she's a vapid tosser of...
Okay, this book, right, by Andrew Haywood from 2015, Key Concepts in Politics and International Relations. I looked up the concept of freedom. It's tied with the word liberty. The two terms are best used interchangeably. Is, in its broader sense, the ability to think or to act as one wishes. An important distinction is nevertheless made between negative and positive freedom. Negative freedom means non-interference, the absence of external constraints on the individual. The individual is thus at liberty to act as he wishes. The clearest manifestations of negative freedom are in the form of freedom of choice, civil liberty, and privacy. Positive freedom is linked to the achievement of some identifiable goal or benefit, usually personal development or self-realization, self-mastery. For Isaiah Berlin, the negative-positive distinction was reflected in the difference between being from something and being free to do something. However, the freedom from and freedom to distinction is misleading because every example of freedom can be described in both ways. So the apparently deep question, are we free, is meaningless, should be replaced by a more complete and specific statement about what we are free from and what we are free to do. Yes, right. Freedom is completely meaningless without reference to the particular hero system that is operating.
Word salads. I mean, that's what she did last night.
That interview was mildly challenging, but not really challenging in the way that a reporter can try to drill in on questions.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Robbie Suave, senior editor at Reason Magazine, and Lucy Caldwell, political analyst and an advisor to Oakland Corps. Robbie, it's striking to me that even the pundits who are on Kamala Harris's side are saying, she did okay, she didn't do any harm, she didn't screw up, but she also made almost no news.
Right. I mean, she was asked to explain some of these policy changes that have taken place. And what's novel about this whole situation is that since she was just made the candidate suddenly by the elites in her party and never had to actually campaign for it, it was really falling to the media, even the mainstream media in this case. I thought Dana did a fine job asking her some of these things. We're now finding out what her policy positions are instead of having there been a campaign where she debates people and she argues and then you find it out that way. The consequence is she's just, running from the things she ran on very unsuccessfully in 2020. And she's proposing policies that are, getting panned economically and all that. But, if I were her, I'm not sure I would do many more of these interviews because.
So Fox usually seems to choose handsome exponents of conservatism and rather dumpy exponents of liberalism.
The vibes of Kamala is enough, and the media is mostly letting her have that, although they did get a little annoyed that they weren't having enough of her time.
Endorsing the idea that from now on she should just stiff the press and just run a vibes-based campaign.
Well, that would be terrible for democracy, but I think that might be the best thing for her
you're saying
campaign.
politically, all right.
No, politically.
So, Lucy, Kamala spoke for a total of...
So, Robbie Soav is he's a libertarian, right-leaning.
Let's take you back in the Wayback Machine to, because it's on tape, a couple of things that candidate Harris, about 5 years ago, has already said.
Favor of banning fracking. So, yeah.
So will everyone have to drive electric cars?
Well, by my plan, by 2045, we will have basically zero emission vehicles only, 100%.
Which would be all electric cars. So, Robbie, it's on tape. Kamala Harris rejected fracking, then she flipped, and yet she tried to minimize that particular flip-flop, at least, by saying things that weren't true.
Those, and you played the border comment earlier, which is the most egregious of all. Look, when she ran on these things against Biden for the Democratic nomination last time and other people, she went nowhere because it turned out these ideas weren't very popular. So now it makes sense that she's just pretending she's not actually changing her mind, but she doesn't stand by them anymore. And I would have liked to see that pressed a little bit harder from Dana Bash, who again did bring up these flip-flops, but then let her just say, well, yeah, I don't actually think that. Like, well, why? Why have you abandoned these? But do you understand that you're abandoning them? Is it you should just say, look, I figured out the American people don't want soft on crime, don't want green energy mandates, don't want the border fixed.
Then she'd have to admit she was wrong.
Then she'd have to admit she was wrong.
All right, look.
Okay. So what about the freedom to make jokes? All right, our ruling elite seem to have concerns about the freedom to make jokes. There's a bloke, Matt Bernius, who writes on one of my favorite websites, Outside the Beltway, centrist, center-left political commentary. And Matt is a design researcher working to create more equitable government systems and experiences. And he takes great exception to a tweet from Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance that Matt finds quite cruel. So J.D. Vance tweets, I've gotten a hold of the full Kamala Harris CNN interview. And he uses...
Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our children.
Thank you very much, South Carolina.
Okay, and so Matt's commentary here is J.D. Vance seems to have a cruel sense of humor, and he seems to have issues with women. In an attempt to dunk on Kamala Harris in her upcoming CNN interview, right, Vance published this tweet. And the clip went viral at the time. And if that was all there was to it, this wouldn't be a story worth paying attention to. However, there was a darker side to the meme. And the beauty contestant would later reflect on how the negative reaction affected her mental and emotional health. I went through a period where I was very, very depressed. I couldn't let anyone see that stuff except for people I could trust. I had some dark moments where I thought about committing suicide. This is the first time I've been able to talk about it. It was awful, and it was every single day for a good 2 years. I've only spoken to my fiance about how I felt in those moments. So here's Matt's critique, right? Most of us would agree that bullying this woman is bad. And when J.D. Vance was called on this, right, the woman also happens to be a Trump supporter. He doubled down, says he won't apologize for a joke. I'm sure some commentators will call me out for lacking a sense of humor, but I don't find punching down funny. I'm not a fan of anger-based humor. It's an especially bad choice to engage in such humor when the subject of the joke is a public supporter of your campaign. Well, when someone says something ridiculous, such as that beauty contestant in a public forum, such as the Miss America or Miss USA beauty pageant, you can't expect the world to ignore you. You are an adult. You want to reap all the benefits of being a public personality, and with that come downsides. So as a conservative, this great moral distinction between punching up and punching down does not make a great deal of sense to me. Elliott Blatt, come back. You can blame it all on me. I was wrong, and I just can't stream without you.
What's up?
What's up, bro?
Can you hear me?
I can.
I have to call in while driving because my phone, I've had this phone for about 4 years, and the battery steadily declines, and so that's like an hour now, so got to replace the battery. Kind of annoying, but whatever. So yeah, fun times. Watching a lot of Mark Halpern. How about you?
Yes, everything he does. Every little thing he does is magic.
So I am just so flabbergasted about how like intelligent people can look at Kamala and just, not retch, not see through this obvious BS. I mean, are they their hero system so strong is that they just cannot be, they cannot, break ranks?
Well, she's not Donald Trump, and that's all that up to 50% of Americans really need to know about her.
Yeah, so it makes me wonder, like, if the polls are accurate, and Trump is truly tied with her, it does reflect poorly on him because
yes,
I think you're like a generic Mitt Romney would be ahead by 20 points here. Don't you think?
No, we're so strongly polarized that I think at best a Nikki Haley or a Mitt Romney might possibly be ahead by 5 points. But I would vote for a Republican no matter who they nominated. I mean, I voted for George W. Bush twice, and he was a disaster.
Yeah, true enough. He was a disaster. And in fact, I voted for Kerry. And I was actually, I was really mad about the Gulf War, and he was the anti-He really wasn't
anti-Gulf War, bro. I mean, everything that you and thank you for your service. I mean, 1 tour in Afghanistan, 2 tours in Iraq. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, at least I'm not a flip-flopper, Luke. Isn't that the weirdest, like, of all the things you can be in politics, the one thing you can't be is a flip-flopper.
Have you ever gone to bed with a flip-flopper? Because my philosophy is that ladies never move. And sometimes I've been with women who are just way too enthusiastic, and it would like knock me off my rhythm. And sometimes like like a very, very delicate part of my anatomy would get bent, and I'd lose my rhythm, and it was not good. So what's your love life experience with the flip-flopper?
You got to avoid the salmon, just hold on. I'm driving. 1 second.
Okay, I'll fill the dead air.
I'm driving around. It's a beautiful autumn morning or close to autumn morning, and I'm out looking. I want to have breakfast, Luke. And all the restaurants are closed. There's no more restaurants in San Francisco. They've all been.
You're a big spender. How much do you typically drop on a Sunday morning breakfast?
Well, I almost never do this, but it's just, it's a holiday weekend. I figure I'm going to treat myself. But I just got out of a coffee shop, and I was served a cup of coffee by a tranny.
Nice.
And so the whole
Did you
thing,
drink
the whole present.
You drank it, right?
I'm still drinking it, yeah.
Good.
But one thing I know, it was $3.90 for a small coffee.
Was everyone in the shop HIV positive? Right? Did they deliberately hire only staff who are HIV positive?
Yeah. Come on, man. I don't ask that kind of stuff. But while this happened, so obviously this was a male to quote unquote female tranny, right?
Yeah.
So it was and I'm just trying to not, evince any disgust. I'm just trying to make it seem like this is just a normal thing and I'm cool. I'm accepting. I'm tolerant. I'm San Francisco. I'm laid back. I'm a hippie, bro. Just trying to play it cool. And then these two construction workers come in to order coffee, right?
Yeah.
And the guy just looks at him and says, "Hey, how you doing, buddy?"
And how did the trans person take that?
Just the whole transaction just considered, continued as normal as if nothing had happened. But it was so visceral,
I used to work construction in Northern California, and I started dating the boss's daughter. So I was 19, she was 15, and she was also seeing other blokes at the same time. And I think she started going to an art school in Boston when she turned 17, graduated high school, one day she comes out, I work in construction in the backyard of her family's mansion, and she wants to introduce me to her friend who's got like a bloke, but with like big puffy pink hair and like a punk rocker. And so she walks out to me working in the backyard, and all the other construction workers just start laughing. And so they turned around and walked back.
Something about, the Hard Hat Rebellion.
Yes. In New York City,
Remember
where the union people beat up on the anti-war demonstrators in the 60s.
Yeah. So do you really think that the American military, like real military personnel would respect Kamala Harris as commander-in-chief? Don't you think that would be wouldn't it provoke some sort of, outrage or rebellion or something?
Right, among some, just like the Clintons had a problem with the Secret Service, because most people in the Secret Service were right-wing and voted Republican, and were often quite open about it. And then the Clintons didn't want Secret Service operating on the floor where their bedrooms were in the White House, because often there'd be stories told about Bill and Hillary screaming at each other. And so Bill and Hillary were quite suspicious of the Secret Service, and their daughter referred to her Secret Service as pigs. So that was quite tense.
That's fascinating, actually. So these are details you pick up because of your extensive reading. You actually do the reading. I imagine this is some sort of tell-all book you've read.
Yeah, it's the best book on. It's called Zero Fail, and it's written by center-left reporter Carol Leonig, who wrote 2 devastating books about Donald Trump. But it's just packed with interesting anecdotes. So apparently George H.W. Bush just treated his Secret Service protection like gold. He deliberately stayed in Washington, D.C. over Christmas so that his Secret Service detail, most of them could have Christmas with their families. And then only then did he go back to his ranch or whatever. Like he would take the welfare. Yeah, he would take the welfare of Secret Service into great consideration. But most people aren't political. Most people in the military aren't political. Only 1% of people really think deeply about politics. And so some people might be affected by the vibes, but it's not overall going to be a significant issue, in particular because anyone who advances in the military is a good, savvy political player. And so they know if they have contempt for the commander-in-chief, they know that the savvy thing to do is to keep it to themselves.
Yeah, and so that's always a thing where there's generals that sort of earn their stripes on the battlefield, and then there's generals that got where they got there through politicking, like Levine, like our tranny general.
Yeah.
Funny times. So, okay. So. It's hard for me to think while I'm driving.
Okay, so here's a question for you. Let's say that you kill someone while you're driving. To what extent am I responsible?
By proxy. So this would be vehicular homicide by proxy. No, it's totally my fault, bro. I'm taking this risk.
So you talked about your battery being low. That's come up before, and so I've never missed an appointment because my battery ran low. But it's one of the most common excuses or reasons that people give. And apparently, according to one academic study, and this completely rings true to me, the amount of battery that people keep on their phone roughly correlates with their credit score. So the type of people who make sure that their phone is always charged tend to be people with high credit scores, and the type of people who struggle with a largely uncharged or dangerously low charged phone tend to have lower credit scores. What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's sort of part of the attention to detail category that you need to have. And normally, I rarely run out of battery. But now that the capacity is so diminished, all my calculations are off. And so I look down, I'm about to I call into 40, and I look down, and I'm at 11%. And I know that's going to be maximum 10 minutes now. So I didn't want to risk the quality of your show by calling in with a, insufficient battery and have me cut out unexpectedly.
I appreciate that. I appreciate
Very
that. But,
disrespectful.
yeah, no, that's good. But you really can't understand why people would vote for Kamala. Like, I completely understand, because I will always vote Republican. So I would expect the other half of the population to always vote Democrat. And you want to be enthused about your candidate, and often you'll be enthused simply because you hate the other candidate so much.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get why people hate Trump. I guess what I don't understand is how they can completely disregard competence, right? It's one thing to overlook a certain amount of shortcomings, but Trump, whether you love him or hate him, he has been president. And, there was a difficult time in the country, and the country didn't blow up, and it wasn't that bad, I guess. I think it all comes down to abortion. I think people just lose their minds about abortion, and they don't care about anything else. I think ultimately, if you unpeel the onion enough, that's what you would get to.
Yeah. Have you?
It's sad.
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Well, it's just kind of a sad commentary on that. It just kind of like sort of the moral health of people, It just strikes me as icky.
And does that get you down?
Not like rainy days or Mondays, but it gets me a little bit down. Yeah, sure. Not down. Like, I don't really think about politics. I only think about politics when I'm, calling in, or I'm listening to your show. Hold on. As a cop, I have to put the phone down. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to get...
You're going to get off?
For talking on a cell phone.
You're going to get off right now?
Huh?
Are you going to get off right now?
No, I don't have to get off, but I'm just curious.
Okay.
No, okay. Is that a pun?
God forbid.
Is this about the earlier question? So, Luke, yeah, like the self-destructive questioning, how old were you when you recognized that you were blowing up your life by doing that?
Probably had tiny intimations when I entered school. I didn't enter school till I was 8 years old, because my father subscribed to the teachings of our Seventh-day Adventist prophet Ellen White that you should send kids to school as late as possible. My brother wasn't sent to school till age 10, so I started behind the curve in social skills.
Yeah.
But I'm sure once I arrived at school and then recognized my place in the social pecking order, which pretty much was always between the bottom and the middle. That was pretty much my gradation all the way through high school, and so I must have had intimations that my caustic, critical, offensive ways of speaking were costing me. I remember people who went to school with me would comment to friends of my parents, like, we didn't know what to do with him. Right? We didn't know what to do with his brain. He was just always spouting off. And people often didn't understand what I was saying. Yes, sir.
But
oh my God, he's been in an accident. We've lost him. Oh my God. Elliott, we hardly knew you, bro. We hardly knew you. Elliott, are you back? Elliott. Oh, so sad. I mean, we were just getting to know Elliott, and then
just want to be seen
My
as,
God.
oh, you know, we're for affordability. We're for helping people own houses. We're for, they don't actually want to do the thing. They don't care about what the.
So I would kind of glory that many people found me impossible to deal with. I perversely gloried that many of my teachers found me the most challenging student they had ever had, and they didn't mean that in a wholly positive fashion. But I chose to interpret it as I'm special. But when you're impossible to deal with, right? When you require a lot of bandwidth from other people, you're hurting them. And I was going through my life hurting people, and as a result, they shunned me and they hurt me back.
Substance or what any of the details are. They just want to be seen saying these words that they think will help them win the election. And that is what we learned. That is like all we learned is they don't care and they don't expect us to care. And frankly, they may be right. Maybe most people just don't care.
LOL, eat at Arby's. Nick, building on that. So if there's not really policy there, but they're using words that we like. Yeah. We like the word freedom. That's a good aspiration.
I love the word freedom, and I think it's great for libertarians that people are, you know, if one of the parties is talking about freedom rather than...
Right. These are all libertarians on the panel. This is a production of Reason TV, which is a libertarian foundation.
The mass deportation, we can have a conversation.
Oh, here's the other thing that I did to that nice, kindly Matt Welch, the editor of Reason Magazine. I'd always mock him very cruelly. I say, you can't be a libertarian because you support socialized medicine. And he has always been a supporter of socialized medicine because of his own struggles getting health insurance. And so he thinks it's the one thing that government should definitely take care of. And I would just keep bringing it up again and again, often in socially inappropriate circumstances. It was... And the poor man, he had the same kind of reaction that blokes would have when they were married to porn stars. And I'd ask the bloke, well, how do you feel about your wife turning tricks on the side? And it was like, I don't want to talk about that. So it was always struck me as bizarre that my friend Matt, who is the editor of Reason Magazine, a libertarian magazine, and he supported socialized medicine. It was as the, God forbid, no, I'm not even going to go there. But I noticed many porn star husbands were very uncomfortable talking about their wives' prostitution activities. I mean, she was an actress, sure, they're happy to talk about that, but that she did, you know, private tricks, they were very uncomfortable.
Conversation. We can elaborate on what freedom actually is versus what was being sold at the DNC. You know, I would say what I learned, the big takeaway from me was that this was not the shit show that virtually everybody expected. And not only was it actually really well, I won't say it was well produced because it ran over time. And, you know, if I can jump to my highlight of this was the fact that James Taylor was bumped off his appearance on.
So I never have a problem with my battery being out of charge because I think that through Bluetooth, my charisma automatically keeps my battery at a high rate of charge. Okay, what is punching down and what is punching up? So Steve Saylor notes back in 2015, when I was young in the 60s and 70s, the spirit of the age was all about satire and disrespecting sacred cows. Yeah, remember that controversial was a good thing in the 60s into the 70s. And a lot of young people emerged triumphant from that era. Many are still around. But today, from their august positions, they lecture us on the dangers of satire and unrestrained comedy. They lecture us about our lack of respect for proper thoughts. Consider Gary Trudeau. He's a scion of old money, liberal, Protestant, good blood, good bone folks. Right? He rapidly triumphed in the 60s as a representative of the rising generation of the educated and the sophisticated. He started the predecessor to his Doonesbury cartoon strip at Yale in the 1960s. He became the Jon Stewart of his generation. But in 2015, right, Gary Trudeau writes in The Atlantic, the abuse of satire. Talks about Charlie Hebdo, free speech fanaticism, and the problem with punching down. Right? My career was not my idea. I got recruited. And I wrote this subversive comic strip because I didn't know any better. In college, there's no downside. In the real world, there is. But the euphoria of being recognized for anything, you don't notice it at first. One of the nicer things about youthful cluelessness is it's so frequently confused with courage. It's a flawed risk assessment. And he wrote a comedic strip that was forever banned. And people were hostile. And he said, I thought we had an insurmountable generational problem, but one night after losing 3 papers, my boss took me out for a steak and he explained his strategy. Right? The 34-year-old syndicate head looked at his 22-year-old discovery, meaning Gary Trudeau, over the rim of his martini glass, smiled and said, don't worry, sooner or later, these guys die, meaning the people who were killing his strip. Well, damned if he wasn't right. A year later, the beloved patriarch of those 3 papers passed on, leaving them to his intemperate son, whose first official act naturally was to restore the Doonesbury cartoon. And following that, a happy pattern emerged all across the country. Publishers who had vowed that Doonesbury would appear in their papers over their dead bodies were getting their wish. Now, many of my colleagues have spent time discussing red lines since the tragedy in Paris, where you had Muslim terrorists shooting up Charlie Hebdo. Traditionally, satire has comforted the afflicted while afflicting the comfortable. Satire punches up against authority of all kinds, the little guy against the powerful. Ridiculing the non-privileged is almost never funny. It's just mean. So how can you tell who are the non-privileged? Well, the answer is simple. By definition, the non-privileged are those who have the privilege of not being ridiculed. Right? That means those who enjoy a sacred identity, such as black or gay or trans. By punching down, this is Gary Trudeau, by attacking a powerless, disenfranchised minority with crude, vulgar drawings closer to graffiti than cartoons, and Charlie Hebdo, and I don't like Charlie Hebdo, wandered into the realm of hate speech, which in France is only illegal if it directly incites violence. Well, voila, 7 million copies that were published following the killings did that, triggering violent protests across the Muslim world. One in Niger, where 10 people died. French government has rounded up and arrested over 100 Muslims who used their freedom of speech to express their support of those deadly attacks. Now, you'd think this would be an interesting topic for Doonesbury to explore. This is Steve Saylor writing. But would that be punching up or down? Muslims or Jews? Which group is punching up and which group is punching down? And just how hard would Gary Trudeau get punched if he took on this topic? Better not to think about it. Right? And then back to Gary Trudeau saying, writing satire is a privilege I've never taken lightly. It's bad to punch down. Right? So if you had the good sense to go to Yale, right, you'd have a more refined sense of discretion and social boundaries, but it's too late for you now. So if you don't want to get punched, you better just shut up and let your social superiors make all the jokes. So when Palestinians slaughter Jews, or when Jews slaughter Palestinians, right, which is punching up and which is punching down? So according to a dominant strain of thought around the world, particularly among Western intellectuals, when non-Europeans slaughter Europeans, that is punching up, and that is cool. When Europeans try to protect themselves, that is punching down, and that is severely constrained. So I've often referenced Amanda Alexander, senior lecturer in law at Australian Catholic University. She published an essay, Revolutionary War and the Development of International Humanitarian Law. So the distinction between civilians and combatants and the protection of civilians are perhaps the central precepts of international humanitarian law today. But now terrorists and guerrillas, right, they are supposed to be accorded all the protections that formerly only belonged to those standing armies that fought in uniform and their nation state had signed on to Geneva Conventions. So Vietnam served as the archetype of the contemporary conflicts that have prompted the International Committee of the Red Cross to draft new laws. All right, so it was troubled by the rise of an enormous tidal wave of guerrilla activity that had not been anticipated by earlier Geneva Conventions. The Vietnam War was the consummate example. Right, so you had revolutionary writings on People's War put into practice in Vietnam, shaping a new language and paradigm of a just war. while advocating for the legitimacy of terrorism and guerrilla warfare. And this language is now adopted by Palestinian movements in the 1970s. They present their struggle as analogous to the Vietnamese People's War. And now you have all these United Nations resolutions proclaiming the rights of national liberation movements, right, to rise up against Europeans, meaning the Jews who have their own Jewish state in the Middle East. So there's been growing support for the Palestinians and their resistance, and opposition to Palestinians and their terrorism now seems shocking. And you have increasing popular and academic commentary in the West questioning the lawfulness of counter-terrorism techniques by Israel. So fighting against imperialism is punching up, and that's cool, right? And imperialism is something that is a uniquely white evil. Right? When people inveigh against the evils of imperialism, they rarely talk about any non-white people practicing imperialism. Counterinsurgency, where you're trying to take down terrorists, that is considered punching down. So Hamas attacks Israel on October 7. That's widely celebrated in elite American campuses, while Israel defending itself against those attacks is increasingly portrayed as illegitimate according to international law. So we have Western academic elites helping Hamas gain international legitimacy, even for its terrorism. Since October 7, broad demonstrations of support have been on display on campuses across the U.S., from New York University to Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania. We have pro-Hamas demonstrations across scores of American universities, shocking in both their public affirmation of Hamas's mass murder and in their rhetoric echoing that of Hamas. But they are punching up, and so that is considered cool.
The first night, because it got too late and he had to go to sleep. It was, 9 or 10 o'clock at night. But so that was great. But more importantly, there was a pivot to the center, or maybe not a pivot, but like at least looking towards that. You did not see pro-Palestinian, protests from the stage. You barely saw them from outside. You saw, this was not drag time story hour, on glorious display or anything like that. What you saw the Democrats talking a lot about was the freedom to live within a wide range of lifestyles, which I found comforting after some aspects of the Republican Party, which seemed to be pushing a kind of norm core, like to the extent that you move away from J.D. Vance as the platonic ideal of a man, you are somehow anti-American. So I thought it was interesting.
Right, the sophisticated observer recognizes that life is about trade-offs. This is Pericles on X. Sure, the lack of a functioning border means that there are Venezuelans with assault rifles taking over your apartment building. At the same time, though, because of this, you get to choose between 12 taco restaurants instead of just 10. So there are trade-offs, important trade-offs. Ronnie Goodman is working on a book, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. And so I did a search in that book for the word joke. I wanted to get a liberal versus conservative perspective on jokes. There were 5 mentions of jokes in Ronnie Goodman's book. So here's one. Michelle Malkin, conservative commentator, describes a Democratic fundraiser in Chelsea, New York, where one comic attacked President Bush as this piece of living, breathing crap, and others took to savaging Vice President Dick Cheney's family, calling his lesbian daughter a big lessie. Yet the media gave this outrage a free pass. Why? It's an Upper West Side Manhattan left-wing Ku Klux Klan mentality, explains Republican Congressman Peter King of New York. Some Southern redneck talk like this about a liberal, everyone would denounce it, but because it's Upper West Side humor, somehow it's supposed to be chic. Enjoying this Upper West Side privilege, liberal comics can issue mock death threats against prominent conservatives and expect everyone to take this in stride. Malkin observes that liberals fantasized about the assassination of George W. Bush and then pleaded that this was an ironic joke. But conservatives who would turn the tables and wish the same upon prominent liberals cannot expect the same understanding, as they are not members of the privileged culture of irony. So I grew up a Protestant, a Seventh-day Adventist, and this following critique rings true to me. So from a Protestant perspective, Judaism and Catholicism are deficient because they, in the process of freeing themselves from the investments of pagans, right? They express this freedom through hierarchies, laws, rituals, ethnic identification, which they subsequently became reinvested, so thereby they slip back into the blindness from which true monotheism is intended to liberate us. And another paragraph here from Ronnie Goldman. Secular liberals claim to promote freedom, but this freedom describes a specific ethos that is just as fixed as our pro-Satmar sensibilities. Satmar are a branch of Hasidic Judaism. Freedom is always the freedom to operate within a hero system. While liberalism holds itself out as the transcendence of all hero systems, no social unifying system can deliver the absolute self-possession promised by the buffered identity. It's a promise inconsistent with these systems' embedded socio-biological nature. Right? This undermines any sharp dichotomies between the self-awareness of the properly civilized and the self-oblivion of those who refuse the disciplines and repressions of the enlightened liberal buffered identity, and instead they cling to their guns and religion and to their teleological illusions of a religious past. So teleological refers to a particular ultimate understanding of history, right? It's looking at phenomena in terms of the purpose that it serves rather than the cause from which it arises. So if secularists refuse to look upon religion as a secular phenomenon, this is because their understanding is not fully secularized, right? It's still inflected by a religiously inspired hostility to the enfleshed pre-modern religiosity for which the Satmar stand as symbols. So Protestantism tends to have few rituals, few distinct items of clothing, but in Catholicism and in Judaism, you have more distinct ways of dressing and more distinct rituals, right? Judaism and Catholicism are much more embodied religions than Protestantism. So Ronnie Goldman's contemporary understanding of the enlightened secular outlook is that it grew out of Protestantism. And so from this secularized Protestant attitude, right, religious conservatives seem to embody all the vices that Protestants once associated with paganism. So from a Protestant perspective, Catholicism and Judaism are much more sunk in paganism than Protestants are. So liberals feel comfortable projecting what is a human constant in all groups, right? Being cemented into a particular hero system. But they project this onto religious conservatives alone because this cementing is but a secularized translation of what was once condemned as paganism and idolatry. And here is a sharp one-sentence analysis from Mark Lilla. Britain and the United States pride themselves on having cultivated the ideas of toleration, freedom of conscience, and a formal separation of church and state. Their success depended, however, on a wholly unique experience with Protestant sectarianism in the 17th and 18th centuries. So the dominant ethos of the United States since its founding comes out of Protestantism, right? The United States would not look as it does if it had been founded by a people with a different religious outlook or a different ethnic outlook, right? The United States was overwhelmingly formed by Englishmen. Right, so from a liberal perspective, clashes between the traditional and libertarian perspectives are clashes about what people care about more. Do they venerate social stability or expressive freedom? Right, the excellent management of society or individual liberty. So they're arguing not about what the world is like, but what the world ought to be like. But Ronnie's argument is that the clash between liberal elites and ordinary Americans isn't strictly about either facts or values. Rather, it concerns rival authenticity narratives, each originating in different historically constructed ways of being human. So it's the buffered identity, the idea that you can develop right and wrong, and you can determine purpose and meaning, and you can build a strong pathway through life just on your own with the power of your own reason, versus trads, conservatives, right-wingers, nationalists, tribalists, who believe that good and evil, right and wrong, purpose, meaning lies outside of you, and to the extent that you fulfill your obligations and do your duty, right? That is the honorable life, not that you get to invent your own morality. So it is this liberalism that stands out as peculiar in history, right? When you look at the entire range of human societies, according to Jonathan Haidt, the statistically normal human society is built upon 6 foundations, not just the 3 endorsed by modern liberalism. So conservatism is completely normal in the context of the anthropological record. Conservatives may be less committed to equality and certain social freedoms, but this is in line with most traditional cultures, which do not have highly developed notions of individual rights. They do not value or seek to create equality among all adults, not even among all adult men. So conservatives are less keen to celebrate diversity, but this too is in line with most historical cultures, which tend to strongly cultivate in-group loyalty. So liberalism has twin idols of freedom and equality. But in practice, this usually cannot effectively substitute for the complex matrices of socially constructed meaning that enable social cooperation and cohesion. So when liberals try to make concrete the ideal of freedom, which they propose, they find themselves always constrained by the habits and predilections of a particular way of life, right? The way of life of the emancipated urban intellectual who usually doesn't have kids, or only 1 or 2 kids. So liberalism promises freedom at the expense of the self when it frowns upon the unified cultural understandings that make most people feel content and happy. So for many, liberalism promises freedom, but delivers only nihilism and alienation. So conservatives look at human rights and personal freedoms, constitutional freedoms, as the specific legacy of a specific people, right? A specific legacy of Anglo-Saxon history, rather than just a partial instantiation of some universal ideal of expressive individualism.
Interesting to see that the Democrats are look towards the center. Somebody like Oprah gave a terrible speech, but it was directed towards people who were not already voting Democratic, which was kind of interesting to think about. The fact that it was accusatory and just saying like, you know, vote for us because we're not as bad as the other people is a huge mistake. And I think it belies what they really care about. But what I learned was that Democrats can occupy a center if the Republican Party runs screaming away from them.
So there's been a joke going around about how Kamala Harris, after taking the lead spot on the ticket, Kamala Harris appears to be running something like a generic Democrat in terms of the polls. But I think what we saw at the DNC was that Kamala Harris is also very determined to just run as a generic Democrat, as somebody who has no defining characteristics outside of being a perfectly placed avatar of the party and what it stands for now, or at least what it wants to be seen as standing for in order to win elections.
So the view from the inside, I, like Catherine, all love to watch the undercard speeches.
Mm-hmm. Matt, if you're watching this, I'm sorry for my offensive tweets and conduct back in 2016. Please unblock me, Matt Welch.
Because they kind of give you a sense of what is the message discipline going to look like, what thing are they going to hit over and over today or during the entire week, because Democrats are much more heavy on the edit button than Republicans are at their convention. So, and also who is delivering that, right?
And not just at conventions, right? The Democratic elite are much more careful in their speech, right? They have a much more complicated and developed speech code than do Republicans and Republican elites.
Well, who wins the prize to get on stage even at 6 o'clock, and who doesn't? And there's an interesting gap between all of that, which is to say that the people that were selected, especially on the first day, but all throughout, and this is kind of underreported in the storylines about this, because I think most people don't pay attention to that, and it kind of makes them feel, oh, it was unions. This was a union.
So I sent Matt an email about a week ago asking him what he knew about the Kamala Harris drinking problem allegations. And Matt, I haven't heard back from you. I'd like to think that my email didn't get stuck in your spam filter. Alvin Gouldner wrote an important book in 1979 called the New Class.
That John Kenneth Galbraith had used to justify capitalism by saying, in fact, in modern corporations, the bourgeoisie may own, but doesn't control the means of production. It's actually controlled by professionally trained intelligentsia. We can also find this in politics. Gouldner argued that the Republican Party really is the representative of the old class, of the moneyed bourgeoisie, the National Association of Manufacturers. But the Democratic Party is not, in his view, primarily the agent of the working class. Rather, it appeals largely to the new class of general and humanistic intellectuals, right, who are overwhelmingly democratic. And here he follows the research of Seymour Martin Lipset, who had shown that the higher you get in the academic hierarchy, the farther to the left your convictions move. If you get to the very apex of the top positions at Harvard, you're likely to find yourself among anarcho-syndicalists or communists, whereas most academics are just left liberals. And in fact, the new class's control of technical information, information which is essential to business and industry, and revolutionizes the means of production, gives it an advantageous bargaining position with the old class, relative to, say, the proletariat or lumpen proletariat. And this is reflected in the fact that despite occasional overproduction of professionals, they still tend to generate far better perquisites and higher incomes than traditional skilled or obviously unskilled labor. Now, part of what constitutes this class, according to Gouldner, is its human or cultural capital, the fact that it believes it can generate income or has a right to derive income from its higher education. But it's also unified by its shared culture of critical discourse, that mode of modern rationality. And it's this culture of critical discourse that makes the new class, that makes intellectuals and intelligentsia feel that they are in some sense epistemically superior to all other classes, and that they have a superior social rectitude insofar as this culture is predicated in voluntary assent and forbids reference to authority or the social position of the speaker. They thus feel they are, in a sense, the most reasonable group in society. And we might think of this culture of critical discourse as a sort of modern logos, which speaks in the ear of humanistic intellectuals and intelligentsia, and gives them the right to conceive of themselves as sort of modern-day Platonic philosopher kings. As Gouldner says, it's this culture of critical discourse that gives them a Platonic complex. I want to conclude this part by saying that Gouldner sees this class as flawed, and it certainly is. It's jealous of its prerogatives, it has an inordinate sense of its self-value, and an inordinate will to power. But nonetheless, it is committed to the public rationality exposed and essentially contained within that notion of a culture of critical discourse. It's also characterized by at least a minimal commitment to a notion of social justice and an almost constant critique of authority and various forms of exploitation, racism, and patriarchy. Thus, while flawed, it still might be a true universal class. Again, in Gouldner's phrase, it might still be the best card history has left to play.
Right, comment in the chat here. Historically, weren't individuals of Catholic backgrounds considerably more heavily represented in porn than those of Protestant background? Seemingly so. But here's the thing. People who lead secular lives from a Protestant perspective, they still maintain often some sort of connection to Catholicism or to Jewish identity that Protestants don't have. So Protestant countries were the first countries to secularize. Protestants secularized much more quickly than Catholic countries. So even people who are screwing around and engaged in all sorts of illicit and immoral behavior, if they come from a Catholic family or a Catholic tradition, will often maintain some sort of connection to Catholicism, where Protestants will have severed all identity with being Protestant. So you find in Roman Catholic countries an obsession with religion and denigrating religion in its pornography. But in Protestant countries, there is no desire to denigrate religion. So in Roman Catholic countries, Roman Catholicism, because it's an embodied religion, it has influence over much more of life. So in cities that are dominantly Roman Catholic, you almost always find far higher amounts of corruption than you find in Protestant cities, because Catholic cities tend to be more corporate. They tend to be more affected by this one Catholic identity. And so you don't have the separation of powers and the individualism that you tend to have in Protestant dominated cities, right? You get a Roman Catholic dominated region in the United States, it almost always has much higher levels of corruption. Roman Catholic countries almost always have much higher levels of corruption than Protestant countries, because Roman Catholicism seeks to dominate or influence or shape or penetrate all of life, while Protestantism increasingly retreats to a relationship of the heart between the individual and God. But Roman Catholicism and Judaism are embodied religions filled with rituals. They permeate much more of life than does Protestantism, which just focuses on the heart. And so because Catholicism covers much more of life and shapes much more of life, you have then much more of an incentive of born people to rebel against it. While in Protestant societies, there isn't this dominant throughout life power that Protestant churches are operating with, right? Nothing like the corporate unitary communities that tend to be built up by Roman Catholics. So Protestant countries tend to have the lowest levels of corruption. Catholic countries almost universally, because they're more corporate and unitary, have much higher levels of corruption. All right, Charles Murray here, writing the Wall
The
Street
roots
Journal.
of STEM excellence. Finding and developing one of our rarest and most precious human resources is a paramount goal.
So one of the ongoing arguments that I had with people on this show in 2018, 2019, and 2020 is that I would keep arguing that there's no limit to which a higher IQ is not more advantageous. Right? There's no plateau at which you cease getting additional returns from high levels of IQ. And that is also Charles Murray's perspective.
By Charles Murray. August 30th, 2024. For 48 p.m. Eastern Time. Every advanced nation has a small group of people who have the potential to accelerate scientific progress and foster the advances in living that go with it. People are eligible for that group not because of their personalities or virtues. They are eligible because they have exceptionally high cognitive ability in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, STEM. Exceptionally high cognitive ability doesn't mean the top percentile, but something far more demanding. Consider the top percentile of basketball ability. A member of the starting lineup of any U.S. men's college basketball team is almost certainly in the top percentile of basketball ability among American males. So is LeBron James. That's how wide the top percentile is. Every starter in the National Basketball Association is almost certainly in the top 100th of the top percentile, the top 10,000th. The same may be said of every major professional sport. We are watching those far into the top 10,000th of ability competing against each other, and still seeing significant differences in performance at that level.
And you see the same thing among live streamers. I mean, Destiny is incredible in the type of compelling shows that he can put on, right? The brain power and just the fast cognitive processing, the very short time between him getting a thought and him expressing it, just incredible.
What's true of sports is true in almost every realm of human endeavor for which we have good measures. We have known this quantitatively since the 1920s, when demographer James Lotka set out to measure the contributions of scientists to the technical literature in chemistry at a time when, unlike today, authorship of a technical paper was reserved for the researchers who actually did the work. Lotka discovered that of all the chemists and physicists who had published articles, 58% had published only one each. 9% of them had produced half of the publications. Keep in mind that then, as now, people who become chemists or physicists are already in the top few percentiles of ability. Only a small subset of them published even one article. We are again looking at a tiny fraction of the top percentile who dominate their fields. Since Latka did his work, this pattern has been found in a wide variety of disciplines and measures of productivity, and it continues to be found in the most recent data. We also have numbers expressed in terms of IQ. In the 1970s, Johns Hopkins psychologist Julian Stanley established the study of mathematically precocious youth by administering the SAT to 12 and 13-year-olds. Some 2,000 of the participants have been followed throughout their careers. Measures of productivity varied substantially within the top percentile, equivalent to an IQ of 135 or higher. Those in the top quartile of the top 1%, equivalent to IQs of 142 and higher, were more than twice as likely to earn a doctorate or be awarded a patent as those in the bottom quartile, and more than 4 times as likely to publish an article on a STEM topic in a refereed journal.
All right, my friend and yours, Richard Hanania, has tweeted, I posted something making fun of Robert Reich's height today. So Robert Reich is an economist. On the left, he stands 4'10". Then I said to myself, this is something that Cat Turd would do. I felt disgusted and I deleted it, even though my tweet was funnier. Right-wing influencers help me grow as a person. They provide an example of what not to be. So abstaining from mocking somebody's physical characteristics is sometimes a good thing, but it's not inherently a virtue. All right. Richard Hanania has a law degree, I believe, from the University of Chicago, and he has a PhD from the University of California at Los Angeles. Right? He is highly educated, and so in his peer group of highly educated people, exercising great speech discipline is a distinguishing characteristic, just like in previous centuries, only different types of elites were allowed to wear different types of clothing. Now that you don't have clothing restrictions by social class, you have speech restrictions, marking yourself out as a member of the elite. So a visceral response to life would comment on a prominent economist like Robert Reich being so ridiculously short. Now, a more disciplined, elevated, reflexive approach to life does not comment on people's personal characteristics, but there's nothing inherently superior in that. It's just a different way of living. So people in previous centuries, they were more likely to comment on people's personal characteristics. They had a more visceral life. They would be more emotionally labile, right? They would feel giddy, they'd feel sad, right? They were much less constrained. And so there are advantages to exercising the kind of speech discipline that Richard Hanania praises, but it's not inherently superior. It depends upon your hero system, right? The same sort of speech discipline that Richard Hanania praises here also resulted in the elite not mentioning that Joe Biden was senile, while conservatives, who tend to exercise less speech discipline than do elite liberals, right, back to 2019, were saying Joe Biden seems senile. They were pointing out a truth about a physical characteristic of Joe Biden that was considered impolite by our educated elite. Kamala Harris frequently appears drunk. This is an impolite thing to point out, but it may very well be a true and valuable thing. So if you open up the Overton window for what's socially acceptable speech, and you forgive, or you allow more comments on personal characteristics, physical characteristics, right, you'll get some discomfort, but you'll also be forced to confront valuable truths. So in certain situations, I agree with the Richard Hanania types that civility is the highest value, but in other situations, telling the truth is more important than being civil. So Hanania just thinks exercising this kind of speech discipline is universally awesome. And I would argue that it is situation dependent, and people who exercise less speech discipline are going to be better in some ways than people who exercise more speech discipline, and vice versa. There's nothing inherently superior about either approach. Right? Viscerally experiencing life and noticing people's physical characteristics and commenting on them is one valid way of living life that brings with it its own beauties and its own perils. Disciplining yourself to never comment on people's physical characteristics also comes with certain beauties and perils. Physical characteristics are linked to opinions at least 50% of the time, says Colin Dell. I completely agree. That's why I wanted to open up more room for commenting on physical characteristics. Often when I'm encountering a thinker for the first time, I want to get a picture of them. Because when I see a picture of them, it's a shorthand for me to get a sense about them. Now, what wonderful commentary do I have to play for you?
I spend a lot of time on right-wing Twitter. I know people say Twitter's not real life, but I would argue Twitter in some ways is realer than real life. You have a guy...
Just like a guy that spends all his time on Twitter would say.
Let me explain this. Some ways, exactly. Because let's say you know a nice guy at work, and he posts far-right stuff on Twitter. The thing him at work is this facade he puts up. Well, the thing he posts on Twitter is what he actually believes.
Did you ever read Everybody Lies by Seth Stevens?
That's a great book.
Yeah. So basically the thesis is that people tell Google things that they don't even tell their partner, their friends, at work,
exactly.
or sometimes themselves.
Yes.
You know, they've got this weird lump on the back of their ankle that they've not allowed to arise in consciousness for ages.
Yes.
But they'll give it a quick Google. So from aggregated, depersonalized Google search terms, you can work out all sorts of
Glad
things.
you said that. So I have a buddy. He does really interesting stuff. He runs AI and has...
Okay, so I listened to this entire show, and I'm not yet sure what to make of Rudyard Lynch. I appreciate many of the things he says, but he places way too much weight on Peter Turchin and Peter Zeihan and the idea that you can learn from history about what's going to happen to us, and he's predicting a civil war in America after this election. And so on the one hand, he says too many ridiculous things for me to take him seriously, but I'm not yet ready to just automatically dismiss the guy because he also says a lot of interesting, useful things.
Systems where you can look at how you move your head, how you twitch your hand. And from that, he makes a 4-factor Jungian model of your personality.
The most Rudyard Lynch fucking friend that I've ever heard. Okay, go on.
Yes. And so he also studies the verbal language of the internet. And we're hitting basically sociopath levels on the internet. And keep in mind, the general populace doesn't have to do this stuff. Just small groups of radicals. I can definitely say that there are large small groups of radicals who would definitely do this. And just like we would agree that this stuff on the left, we would agree that there are people on the left who want to do this. And I mean, what I'd say is look at the ruling class. Look at the Democratic Party was trying to take Trump off the ballot. The news constantly lies. Let's go through all the big content creators. Destiny said it was okay. He wouldn't be against killing conservatives. Vaush said progressives should get guns to fight against conservatives. You've had Hassan Piker.
So this guy dropped out of college. So he's an independent, self-taught individual. So on the one hand, I think he's way too credulous with falling for the Peter Turchin and Peter Zeihan analysis, seemingly whole hog. On the other hand, he does have an admirable independence of mind.
Has defended Houthi pirates. On the right, we know that Nick Fuentes, this is the stuff he's definitely not against. And so these people repeat back to their audiences what their audiences want to hear. And so I struggled to find a single institution in our society that is not on a single.
Okay, this is what Colin Liddell says. Good takes mixed with absolute nonsense takes is the invariable sign of the over commentator. I was just thinking about this. I would probably overstream, right? It would be more impressive if I did fewer streams of higher content than so many streams with mediocre content. I'm just thinking to myself, am I streaming to regulate my own emotions? For example, when I feel frustrated or emasculated by my day, I often want to take back control by going live and giving my perspective on life. And then I also notice I've got an ego. Often what's driving my live streaming is that I think that I have something smarter to say than other people. Now, I try to harness that narcissistic desire to a good end, in that, okay, I want to stand out. I want to say something that's smarter and sharper than somebody else. But let me take that selfish, self-aggrandizing impulse, and let's see if I can use it to produce something that is a contribution. Can I harness the dark things going on inside of me and admit to them on a live stream that I had an ego. I want to stand out. I think I've got something sharper and smarter. And then I want to confess, I have been falling into spending hours thinking about particular sins. And you're shocked. You think, oh, once 40 lays his head on the pillow, he's just thinking about God. He's thinking about Torah. He's thinking about unknotting some difficult passages in the Talmud. He's thinking about completing German idealism. But no, often when unfortunately, over the past 2 weeks, more and more, when I put my head on the pillow at night, I'm thinking about highly lurid scenarios with certain women I've known in the past. And is there not enough in the Torah to occupy me? Does the field of symbolic logic not have enough depth and breadth to keep me fully involved? Is not our challenging political situation important enough to allow me to think about that? Is there not enough in the canon of Western literature to occupy me before I drift off to sleep? Why am I wishing that in this situation 30 years ago that I had done X instead of Y? I mean, surely it would be better, it would be healthier, it'd be more righteous for me to spend that time before I drift off to sleep yearning to connect with God, with the divine, to be, to meet my Maslow hierarchy of needs. Now, why am I replaying, rewinding, and redirecting certain intense interactions with comely young women? I mean, is there not enough in philosophy to keep me occupied? Does Los Angeles not have enough problems? Why am I not thinking about the homeless? I walk past the homeless, right, splayed out on the street, intoxicated, drugged, drunk, raving, dirty, filthy, bewildered, unhappy. And do I pay them any mind? Do I even spend 5 minutes a day thinking about their troubles and what I could possibly do to help them? No, I'm spending my time with my head on the pillow before I drift off to sleep. And I'm thinking, oh, when she dressed with those boots up to the knee, I mean, she was definitely sending me a message, and I didn't read that message correctly. So if I was in that situation again, this is how I would handle it. But that's not a productive way to spend my time. Should I not be reflecting on the beauties of Yosemite and Yellowstone? I mean, should I not be thinking about how to improve water quality in Flint, Michigan? We have a world on fire, and yet when I lay my head on the pillow, I'm thinking about my little China girl and how she wore these particular shorts, and now I'm remembering how she'd cross her legs a certain way when she'd sit on my chair facing me, and thinking, oh, she was sending me a signal. She wanted me to make a move on her much earlier than I did. And then I'm playing out how I should have encountered her. But am I taking her welfare into consideration? Am I looking at her as a complete human being? Am I considering her emotions, her feeling of psychological safety? Am I considering what's best for her family and her future prospects? Am I contemplating the totality of this person, her literary interests, her friends and family, her commitment to her family's business? No, I am taking the totality of this human being and I'm shrinking her down to an object to sate my demonic lust. And there was a time when I was able to go through the day with almost no lust, right? There were days, I remember days in 2019, 2020, right, where it felt like I had fewer than 5 minutes of lust a day. And now the time of me just spiraling into these selfish, cruel, demonic scenarios with these comely young women. What a waste of time. I could be composing symphonies. I could be writing librettos. I could be writing odes. I could be praising Donald Trump in iambic pentameter before I drift off to sleep. But I'm stuck in this spiral of like way too much lust. And why is that? Because I've created increasingly sanitized, isolated life. So I touch no one and no one touches me. I have this attitude that I am a rock. I am an island, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. And I don't want other people to gum up and to mess with and to restrict my freedom of speech on my live streams. But how much have I reduced my humanity? How much am I falling short of my spiritual, religious, psychological, cultural, interpersonal ideals? And so these patterns of obsession with sin, right? They're a reflection of the overall quality of my life. This is just a symptom that I've become too isolated. My life has become too antiseptic. And there's a core part of me that wants to connect, and it's doing it through these devilish scenarios where I reduce these women to simple objects to sate my desires. And that's not how I want to be. I've got these visions of swastikas with my little China girl. My God, this is not who I am. No, I still got my bulwarks up. I'm still 12 years no fap, right? Still staying clear of the porn. But I'm creating porn in my own brain, and I'm hanging out there. I'm developing and directing and starring in pornographic movies in my own mind. Is there not enough in the book of Deuteronomy for me to stay occupied? Is there not enough inspiration in the Siddur, the Jewish prayer book, to take my soul and to elevate it towards heaven? I mean, have not the rabbis done enough for me to pull out of this selfish spiral of indulgence of my demonic lust? Why do I keep out a picture of my Rebbe? I mean, once I encountered the warmth of my Rebbe's smile, no other life was possible for me. If I just allow myself to reconnect just for 30 seconds with my sense of my Rebbe, then this selfish, lustful direction for often the hours between 10 p.m. and midnight, right? Maybe it'd go in a different direction. So I want you to know I've taken concrete steps, right? I've had more social interaction, more heartfelt conversation, right? I've studied more Hasidut, right? More. I spent more time with the great Hasidic masters. Yes, it feels like a symptom of the moral decay that is gnawing at the heart of this country. My ego, my selfishness has just taken over. Like, what need do I have to create pornographic scenarios in my own mind? Is there not enough in the works of Shakespeare to keep me properly occupied?
Institution that reflects the public consciousness of the population that's not just in a really, really scary place now.
So are you saying the people who have some of the loudest megaphones have the extremist voices?
They have those extremist voices because it's what the people want. They're reflecting, and I'm a content creator. I know how this works, where you, as a content creator, I like to joke I'm married to my audience. So I try to maintain a good relationship with my audience because we're stuck together. I'm a college dropout. Like, I have to make this work. And so the content creator.
So the chat says Adderall will make a more elevated path difficult because it increases dopamine. But during the day, I don't have this problem. I am not creating pornographic scenarios in my mind during the day. I am thinking about my responsibilities. I am thinking about my opportunities. I'm thinking about how can I be of service. I'm thinking about how can I aggrandize myself. But I'm not directing and participating in pornographic scenarios in my own head during the day when I'm medicated on Adderall. I'm talking about at night when I put my head on the pillow, when Adderall has run its course, when Adderall has taken and done its thing with me, right? I may very well have taken my last Adderall at 10 a.m., right? And this is 12 hours later, where there's virtually no Adderall in my system, and yet the lust has been taking over.
Creators normally have a pretty good comprehension about what their audience wants to see, and they're very glued into this. So if all of these content creators are saying violence is okay, that means it's what their audience wants to hear. And I've given like 15 different proxies. It's yet another proxy for the public wants this.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something interesting about the displeasure and the sort of disgust that some elements of the far left have with a big chunk of the West, which is white guys. You know, if you're a white man, you are the very, very bottom of the victimhood hierarchy. You get no points at all. You had this quote, which I really thought was interesting. Don't gloat over your conquered foe. It gains you nothing and makes the conquered more dangerous.
Yeah.
And that to me is indicative of this really sort of, well, actually, just explain that quote to me. Like, why was that so interesting?
I mean, if you look at the history of empires, it's obvious. Like, if you want to conquer someone, you need to kind of have a relation.
Okay, when I hear that answer, if you look at the history of empires, the answer is obvious. And my whole system has a very strongly negative reaction. But maybe these are just my demonic, selfish impulses speaking.
Relationship with them. It doesn't have to be a good relationship, but let's look at the British Empire as an example. When the English subjugated the Irish and the Scottish, they gave them social status if they fought for the empire. You could be an Irish or a Scottish guy, go to India, and you'd be treated like an English person. That was a way to get rid of all of the aspirational, aggressive young Irish and Scottish guys. With the Romans, if they conquered you, you were a sharp young guy, they would let you into Roman culture. And so when you conquer someone, you still have a relationship with.
Assimilate in some way.
Exactly. And the left always really shocks me because their complete lack of strategy is insane, where they do not look at the.
Really, does the left have a complete lack of strategy? When he makes these grand pronouncements, I get this strongly allergic reaction. But now I've got like this fist. Like, oh. I have touched on something.
The left's great strength is the ability to manipulate people, where they can, especially women, the left has like 10 different hooks in the collective psyche of women that they can.
Bro, you didn't see me back in the day, God forbid.
Pull from to get them to do what they want. They're horrible at grand strategy, though. And it's really shocking where they just set up their entire coalition their coalition building is really bad, which is, I could explain that if you'd like. And so they've established no incentive for white men to cooperate inside the system, and they keep on ritually humiliating them. I don't think this would be this bad if the left didn't turn every single vector of culture into ritual humiliation of white men. Even if they just let Hollywood not be woke, I think it would make things a lot better. But normies can't not ignore Hollywood. And I'm going to throw this point in here. We're at a point where the democratically elected governments of the West are purposely committing civilizational suicide.
Another comment that I just have very strong reactions to. He says a lot of things that sound incredibly profound, but I suspect upon analysis they would fall apart.
Reached this threshold and we can't talk about it. Something's very wrong. Where the governments of the West, a lot of them are doing degrowth, the degrow and industrialized economy. They're bringing in immigrants not out of
Well, if you've got a falling population, you're going to have degrowthing going on.
Economic self-interest, but to replace the local population. They're trying to over-regulate the economy. They're trying to get rid of to get the system to work.
How so?
I'm going to use an example I did from the last video. There was no concept of employment in the pre-industrial world. Everyone was a renting farmer and they worked for themselves. And in the pre-industrial world, the family was an economic unit. Your wife, your father was your boss. You worked with your father. Your mother helped manage the economic system that was the family. You knew everyone around you. In the pre-industrial world, society was a community of people you know. Every single service, whether your religion, whether your insurance, whether your military defense, whether your people you work with for your job, they were all people you knew. It was a community. And so the idea of splitting people up into all these different subcomponents of their lives, it didn't exist back then. And now modern civilization is a bureaucracy. I like to say a normal person knows significantly more bureaucracies than they have friends, where there's the bureaucracy that handles waste, there's the school, there's your work, etc.
Okay, this point seems like a really strong point, right? That the average person knows significantly more bureaucracies than they have friends. Right, that I find stimulating.
And the thing with bureaucracies is you can't build up intimate social connections. And so what happens here is that because society gets atomized and split up due to the sheer scale of industrial civilization, it means a person has to wear their mask all the time. They can't be authentic. They have to wear their mask with their boss. They have to wear their mask often with their families, with their friends. And we've consistently found in all the great big universities.
This strikes me as a great point.
Like Harvard and Columbia have studied this. The most important component for happiness is social connection. And so that would have significant social effects that we wouldn't even mentally process. It's not a side dish, it's the main course. And one of the most interesting books I've read is The History of Manners by Norbert Elias. And it's a history of manners in the Western world from the Middle Ages until the present. And the fascinating thing is in the Middle Ages, if you wanted to cook something, you would cut up the animal carcass in front of your friends. In the Middle Ages, it was completely normal for friends and family to have sex in front of each other. Knights would write poetry about how much they loved the act of killing. It was a society where, like, there was no...
I don't think Richard Hanania would approve of this sort of behavior.
Concept of privacy. And those are things that we find disgusting in our society because we deal with so many people we don't know that we don't want to see people we don't know do those things. And so the argument that the Unabomber made and
right, most blokes feel uncomfortable when another bloke shares details of his sexual interactions. That's my sense of things. I know I'm often making my blokey friends feel uncomfortable when I, God forbid, in the past have shared such details.
This is really
right. They explain to me, I don't want to picture you in these, very specific situations.
Crazy, where the left societies in collapse normally push their worst trait even further. And that's a fascinating historical trend where when the Aztecs knew they were going to die as a civilization, they killed more people.
Okay, let's bring Kip back to the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, man, just sitting here in Tennessee cooking up some spaghetti and getting ready to eat. But I just wanted to give you a call and ask you not to beat up on Rutger too much. I noticed at the very end there when I started to contact you, you found a point of his that you could appreciate. But I just wanted to stress, I've got a 23-year-old daughter. He is 23 years old. I mean, imagine the pornographic concerns you and I had at 23 years old and how little we cared about the kind of things he cares about.
Oh, well, when I was 23, I was very elevated, Kip. I wasn't an animal, a beast like you. I devolved in my 30s, but at 23, I was a prince among men.
Okay. Well, I can see him. When I see Rutger, I see myself and another young fella named Eric Luna, who's no longer with us. When we would go to school, I would bring in my almanacs and I would bring in atlases and all the things that nobody in school would care about but Eric Luna. And Eric would bring in all these illustrated Civil War history guides, and he could tell you every general from every battle and how many casualties there was. And I was so impressed. But the truth is, this was before Eric and I would have ever found drugs or anything like that. And our brains like geeking out on stuff like that. And Rutger, I can just see him as he's one of us, and he's probably one of you too. You know, can you see that in him? Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I haven't paid particularly sharp attention to what he says. I just dip in and out of the chat.
Right. Well, I could tell you are more of a fan than Chris Williamson than you are of Rutger. And I will tell you that Chris probably or Rutger probably gets some things wrong, but my God, he's working it out. And to even have clues that he has at 23 years old, and sometimes he'll throw up some insight that I'll say, man, that's so much beyond his years that he can actually think like that. But he's originally from, I believe, Pennsylvania, and I don't know what he does now, but he foresees a problem. He, in fact, if I don't know if he mentions it with Chris Williamson, but he foresees a problem with young men in the same way that I spoke to you about it last week. You know, he sees the crisis of really no future for them, and maybe I don't know if he mentions anything like a glass ceiling or whatever, but just the fact that unless they're exceptional like Rutger, they're not going to go far. You know, they're going to be, their best gig is going to be probably to find a trade and just charge us through the nose, you know, charge the rest of society through the nose, and just try to make ends meet that way. But really, I didn't have a lot, unless you had any questions. I just wanted to tell you a great show and let you know that I'm a fan of Rutger.
Okay, I got confused. I thought you were talking about someone in the chat called Brother Rustig, but no.
I'm talking about that young fella.
Yeah, Rudyard Kipling or whatever the guy's name is.
Yeah, Kipling. That's who I was named after. My mother didn't name me that on what we would call my government name, but I was called Kip since birth from everybody, and she was a fan of Kipling. I think he's
good to hear.
All right, see you, bro. I'm gonna go eat my spaghetti. Have fun.
Okay, take care. Bye. Okay, let's go back here. Rudyard Lynch.
That they were going to lose World War II, they killed more Jews. When the Muslim world realized the European colonialists would wipe them out, they became more conservative. And so what the left did upon dealing with the underlying issues of industrial civilization is that they doubled down on using social engineering to control people. If you're a leftist, you're not allowed to like your country. You're not allowed to be possessive in romantic relationships. You're not allowed to want to kill people. You're not allowed to be chauvinistic and naturally push your own self-interest. You're not allowed to use magical thinking or belief.
Okay, I don't think that's accurate.
Even the divine. Where if you look at the left's worldview, and I know lots of people like this, people who
many people on the left are religious. Right, many Christians are on the left. Many religious Jews are on the left.
Or just the inner elite, or The low-level elite of the managerial class is completely socialized. If you look at someone like, let's say, a local bank branch manager or someone who works in the bureaucracy of Google, there are people who can't change out of the corporate America setting. They don't show a wide variety of emotions. They don't think things they're not told to. They do whatever their elites say. They believe...
Has that not always been the way? Has it not always been the case that you've got chattel class that just does what the elites expect of them and want to model what their betters are doing?
It's the degree of control. I mean, everything. One of the things I like to say is everything is a matter of range, and so the range is everything. The degree of socialization we have now is completely unparalleled. Where you look at the left wants to shut down human nature. They want to push for a society where you don't have kids, where you don't push for your nation's self-interest, and all the things I said before. And so there are differing degrees of control, and I don't think it's that much. It's not a top-down control. It's not the Soviet Union, where if you don't follow orders, the Politburo shoots you. It's more so that through the process of education and socialization, we have an incredibly rigid social code that doesn't have place for human nature.
We'll get back to speaking to Rudyard in 1 minute. It's on Nick Fuentes.
Oh, did you hear my recent beef with him?
You had beef?
Oh, yeah. So I released my most successful tweet ever came out. I sent it out last week, and I called him a Fed. It got 3 million views, and I detailed all the reasons why I think he's a Fed.
Give me the portfolio. Give me your proposal.
So, the short answer is I was looking at his various self-interests, and I realized the calculations he was making were not actually... the calculations he were making were not what made sense for him. So he targets all the other figures inside the hard right, which doesn't really make sense unless he's a Fed, because you'd think these would be coalition partners. Instead, what he's doing is he's targeting he targeted Mencius Moldbug, Bronze Age pervert, Zero P Lovecraft. I think there's some evidence for Solbra. He's targeting all these people, many of them for being Jewish, but these are the kinds of people that could genuinely, I mean, I don't agree with their ideas, but I respect that they have intellectual grit. And then on top of that, he portrays the hard right in the least sympathetic light possible. He is openly a tradcath, incel, anti-democracy, Holocaust-denying fascist. So if I was in his shoes, I would say, yes, I love democracy, but what we have now is not real democracy. I support real democracy for the people. And the only way to have real democracy for the people is to centralize it in the hands of a leader who can represent the will of the people. That's what I would say if I was him. I would not say those things because he attacks other right-wing thinkers. He makes himself look very bad. He got off really light for J6, which you'd think that the legal system would go after him punitively, because he's exactly the kind of person who they'd like to make a symbol out of. But no, he got off very light. And I think what happened is that I don't think he's like genetically a Fed. I think it was something that was forced on him in exchange for not going to jail, I think he genuinely is a conservative, but I think he's forced to do some stuff in order to not go to jail.
That is a serious conspiracy theory.
Okay, David Goldman has an interesting tweet. Chutzpah isn't a nasty enough term to characterize the Atlanticist liberals who slander Hungary's government as authoritarian. These are the same budding totalitarians who censored social media, as Mark Zuckerberg just confessed regarding Facebook. Freedom House reports the Hungarian government does not place any restrictions on access to social media or communications applications. We live under censorship and a massive surveillance state. Hungarians can say and read anything that they want. Okay, so there are some circumstances where an egalitarian state, society, culture is going to be best aligned with the state's interests, and other situations where you want to be living within a xenophobic police state when you're facing substantial threats, such as threats from Hamas terrorists. Right, here is a retired IDF general talking about October 6th.
Difficult time. On October 6th, I live in Tel Aviv. On October 6th, near our Shabbat dinner, my wife, Dr. Gali Tibon, a Holocaust researcher, and myself, we were focusing on the 70th anniversary of Kibbutz Nahal Oz. Kibbutz Nahal Oz is the closest point to Gaza, less than 1 kilometer from the border. And our son, Amir, and his wife, Miri, decided to move there as a Zionist act after one of the operations in Gaza. And they lived there, and we were very proud of them. Now, on the 70th anniversary, our granddaughter, Galia, 3.5 years old, was supposed to dance in front of the whole kibbutz. And we got a call from the south, which basically said that the first dance is great, but they need some help on the second dance. And we were a little bit worried because we wanted that she will be very happy. I don't know why, on Saturday morning, we woke up very early in the morning, and we live in Tel Aviv, so we went to walk and swim in the Mediterranean Sea. 6:30 in the morning, while we were in the middle of the sea, we heard the sirens. And basically, like many other Israelis, we look at each other. My wife asked me, "No, what do you say?" And I said, "We are in the middle of the sea. What can happen to us?" And we continue to swim. 7:15 in the morning, we entered our Jeep. I opened my cellular phone, and I saw a WhatsApp text from my son, Amir, which basically said, "Dad, there are terrorists around our house in Kibbutz Nahal Oz." Now, my whole story is about decisions and values. And I will try to highlight every time on this some kind of a junction. So immediately I called Amir. At that time, I can speak with him. And I told him, "Amir, lock the house, lock every window, every door, enter the safe room, lock the door from the inside, be quiet."
Right. If you are under attack, if your group is under attack, you want to have locked doors, right? You should generally have locked doors when there is a significant chance of danger outside, limit access.
Quiet. I'm sending the military. And we are speeding home, and I'm trying to call. I retired 9 years ago, but I still have connection. So I'm calling the Chief of Staff, Herzia Levi, the Southern Commander, Yaron, and the Division Commander, Avi. I was their commander in the past. And basically, I wrote them, there are terrorists inside Nahal Oz. 7:22 in the morning, the only one who replied to me was the Chief of Staff. We said, "We know." And we are coming home about, it's about 10 minutes later. And, someone like me who served so many years in the military, supposed to trust the military on such an issue. I was not aware how big is the attack. But something in my heart told me, "No, you have."
Right. So as moderns, we increasingly outsource our life, right? We outsource our health concerns to our doctor. We trust the military or the police to deal with these kind of armed threats.
Have to go there. So immediately I changed. I took my pistol because.
So this kibbutz is about 2 hours drive, right? But his son's family are in a home surrounded by terrorists, about 2.5 hours drive away.
I was under so much pressure, I didn't even think about, I have an old pair of uniform with ranks, but I didn't wear them. And then my wife told me, "No, let me drive for you because you will need both hands to call people and maybe to use a pistol." And this was a very good advice. So we are.
Right. So just imagine driving with your wife, right? You're in your 60s, presumably his wife's in her 60s, right? Having your wife drive you into an incredibly dangerous situation.
Jumping into our Jeep, and we are speeding south. 7:30 in the morning, we got another text message from Amir. They are shooting on the house. I think there is a terrorist inside the house. By the way, he was not mistaken.
Right. Imagine that's your child and his family in a house surrounded by terrorists. Terrorists are firing on your house, have penetrated the house, and you are over 2 hours drive away.
Because 7:30 in the morning, more than 100 terrorists entered Kibbutz Nahal Oz on the first wave. They had a very good intelligence, so they went directly to the house of Ilan Fiorentino, Zichrono Livracha, the head of the security of the kibbutz.
And a reason they had very good intelligence was because the kibbutz was so open and liberal to Palestinians. It gave them jobs, drove them to the hospital. They opened up their kibbutz and their lives to Palestinians, who then reported back to Hamas, right, how you can violate and destroy and rape people in this kibbutz.
He went out to fight with them, and he was the first.
Right. This kind of Hamas attack on a West Bank settlement would not have been nearly as successful because settlers aren't trying to be nice to Palestinians and to Arabs, right? Settlers take their self-defense very seriously. These left-wing liberal kibbutzniks, right, they outsourced largely their security to the military, and they tried to treat the Palestinians with love, and in response, they got slaughtered like lambs.
First casualty of Kibbutz Nahal Oz. The whole battle was on my son's porch because they are neighbors. And we have video from the cameras of the Hamas on my son's porch. So one wall distance between them and my son. And basically, I said, Amir, be quiet. You know, we are sending the troops. And we are speeding. I'm trying to call everyone who I know from the military. Nobody responds. From Ashkelon, we are the only vehicle on the road. We turn left on Yad Mordechai Junction. The traffic is red, but nobody is there. So we are just rushing. And basically, we meet the war near Kibbutz Nir Am, near Shderot. And this is something just like a movie. We see a police car standing in the middle of the car, and there is a white pickup coming to them, and the policemen are shooting from both sides of this vehicle. And one of the policemen turned to me and said, "Go away, go away." We stop aside. We were, thinking what to do, maybe to cross through the fields. And it's a matter of seconds that suddenly a young couple jumping from the bushes near the main road into the fire and asking for help. So immediately we opened the door, we let them in. They were shaking. We gave them water. We asked them, what happened? And they said, we were in a festival. Suddenly terrorists came, they slaughtered everybody. We don't know how we escaped. So this was, Now here is decisions that you have to take in seconds according to your values. And immediately we understood that we cannot leave them there because they will not survive. And we decided, we didn't even talk, my wife and I. We did a U-turn and we took them all the way back to Ashkelon, where we saw a police car. We left them near the police car and basically saved their life. And then we are deciding to go on a different way. It's the 232 road to Shderot. The connection with our son Amir is becoming very bad because the electricity fell in Kibbutz Nahal Oz and the cellular network fell, so we hardly can hear from him. I talked with some other kibbutz members, and I got a picture that there are a lot of terrorists all over. And then near Kibbutz Beruchail, we are facing a police checkpoint. We stop there. I'm getting down. I show them my general ID, and I said, please let me go. My son has terrorists inside their house in Kibbutz Nahal Oz, and they say, no way, it's a war zone. And I'm begging, and my wife is crying, but they say, no way. We have to admit on that day that the big plan of the Hamas was to send all those pickups to all the major cities in Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Ashkelon, and to slaughter people all over Israel. On that day, nothing worked in the military plans, but the police plan to put checkpoints and around and terror attack area worked. And basically those brave policemen saved the state of Israel. We lost 61 brave policemen, but for me, it didn't work. And then suddenly one of the policemen said something which basically rang my bell and changed my whole understanding. He said, no, don't worry. The military is taking care of the situation. And I was in the region almost 2 hours. I didn't meet even one soldier. Everyone who I called did not respond. I met those guys from the Nova Festival. I understood that I'm on my own. So we switch gears. We bypass this police checkpoint through the fields. Near Shderot, we are facing another police checkpoint. And we understood if they will stop us, we will not go to Nahal Oz. So we just rush through the police checkpoint. We opened the windows, they pointed their guns on us, and basically we shout, we are Israelis, don't shoot, don't shoot. About 10 o'clock in the morning, we are at Shderot Junction. Now, I served many years in the military. I was always combat. I saw bodies. This was part of my profession. I never saw something like this in my lifetime. So the whole junction was full of cars, upside down, burning on the ditches, and it was all full of bodies of young people, bodies of policemen, bodies of terrorists, motorcycles with gas and license, huge mess. And basically, this is something which I never saw in my lifetime. So we stop aside And we had a discussion, my wife and I. We didn't talk too much because we were focusing. I was focused on the mission. Now, we don't have connection with Amir anymore. And basically, my wife is telling me something very smart because I'm telling her, listen, Gali, this is very, very dangerous. I don't, I never saw something like this in my lifetime. And then she said, no, if I would tell you about a couple, not in Israel, somewhere else, not us. And basically, they are, 10 miles from their kids where they have terrorists inside their house. What would you suggest them? And this was it. We decided that we are going. So we are going south. The whole area, 10 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning, was occupied by Hamas. There were no state of Israel and no IDF. And we are driving on the road. We are the only vehicle on the road. And my wife is maneuvering between bodies of young Israeli people. And I'm very ready and alert with my pistol. And then it's not a long distance, near Kibbutz Mefalsim, halfway to Nahal Oz. Basically, there is a battle on the gate of the kibbutz between soldiers and terrorists. So we are jumping to a shelter nearby, and basically we are waiting until the fire ends. It's almost about 12 noon. And then, suddenly my dream comes through. 3 armored vehicles with Yamam. This is the elite police force, the best force anti-terrorist in Israel, coming to the junction. And I'm going to them and I'm begging again. I said, the battle here is end. Come with me to Kibbutz Nahal Oz. And the soldiers really want to help me. But then the commander, and this was one of the biggest problems on that day, said, I need orders, I need permission. And basically the whole system collapsed. Nothing worked. The Hamas occupied the division base of Gaza. And I'm begging. I beg like I never begged in my lifetime. And then one brave soldier, he was already wounded, but not critical. He said, Noam was my commander when I was in the West Bank, in Duvdevan unit. I'm going with him. And this was the first one who really helped me on that day. So we decided to leave Gali there alone in the shelter. And we are going to south, to the unknown. There is shooting all over. And we are driving in my vehicle. Now I'm driving with a pistol. And Avi, he's, full arm, but wounded. And we are going south near Sad Circle. You have to turn west to Nahal Oz. And basically, there were Israeli attack helos in the sky. And we were afraid that they will identify as terrorists and shoot at us. So we waited a few minutes. And then suddenly a military vehicle came, officers from the paratroopers basic training. And we asked them, what is your mission? And they said, we heard that there are forces near Nahal Oz who need help. And said, great, let's go together. And now we are driving in a very side road to the kibbutz Nahal Oz. And I'm leading and they are behind me. And then about 1 kilometer, when we see the houses of the kibbutz, we heard shooting again. I'm looking at my left-hand side and I see an Israeli Jeep. It's full of holes of bullets. On the one hand side, you see 5 Israeli troops. And on the other hand side, you see about 7 or 8 Hamas Nukhba soldiers attacking them. So immediately we stop, we jump, and I'm jumping and lying between the soldiers. We are under very heavy fire. Immediately, I understood that my pistol is useless. And then I'm turning to my right-hand side, and there is 3 Israeli troops, all dead. Chen Buchris from Ashdod, the deputy of Maglan unit, Yiftach Yabetz from Ramat HaSharon, an officer, and Afik Rosenthal from Kfar Menachem, all dead. And on my left-hand side, there are 2 soldiers, which are, very, very in a difficult situation. And, at that moment, basically, you become a soldier again. So I'm taking from one of the bodies. Later, I understood it was Chen Buchis, his M16 and his helmet. Now I'm one of the soldiers. I see 2 terrorists coming from my side. I killed the first one. I hit the second one. I think he was only wounded. And then it was quiet. The road to Nahal Oz.
Okay, so I put a link to this incredibly compelling video in the video description. All right, let's get a little bit more here from David Goldman on China, Russia, and Iran.
5. Iran has no land army to speak of, certainly no tanks. Their aircraft are 50 years old and barely functional. So Iran is in no position to fight war with Israel. Iran would lose. It should not try. The Chinese are adamant in their discussion of this publicly and privately that they don't want a war between Iran and Israel, and there's an extremely simple reason for it. Now, Israel, in effect, has said to Xi Jinping, that's a nice little economy you've got there, Mr. Xi. It would be a shame if something were to happen to it. A couple of Israeli rockets hitting the two big Iranian terminals on Karg Island would shut down all of Iran's oil exports. The price of oil would go to $150 or $200 a barrel. Who is the largest importer of oil from the Persian Gulf? Of course, it's China. That would be a devastating blow for the Chinese economy. So if, God forbid, it came to a shooting war between Iran and Israel, China would be a major loser. Russia is certainly working with Iran producing drones. The Shahed drones that it uses to reasonably good effect in Iran and Ukraine probably cost about $10,000 to produce. They might be even cheaper. They're essentially a plywood frame with a moped motor and about $100 worth of electronics. They're very cheap to make. And the Russians use them, of course, very effectively, not because they're hard to shoot down. They're very easy to shoot down, but you can set 100 of them out at a time, swamp Ukrainian air defenses, and open the way for your more powerful ordnance, your ballistic missiles, to get through, which is, of course, what they did this week in 2 waves of strikes against Ukraine's energy infrastructure. But the Russians have been extremely cautious about giving Ukraine any of their better ordnance, the kind that might actually make a difference.
You mean giving Iran?
Iran, yes. Iran wants the S-400 system, which can track aircraft much more effectively and larger number and at greater distance than the S-300. We don't really know exactly how good the stuff is that Iran has, because these Russians have domestic versions and export versions, which are far less effective. So Iran has asked these things. Russia has not given them. One simple reason is that Russia has an urgent need for all of its best air defense systems to fight the Ukraine war. It doesn't have a great deal to spare. But it's also shown a great deal of willingness, as you know, to cooperate with the Israeli Air Force in Syria. Russia does not want to tangle with Israel. And
on the other hand, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? On the other hand, in November, the Iranians announced that they had finalized a deal to purchase advanced fighter craft from Russia. I'm just going over the list. They agreed to buy Su-35s, MiG-28, Mi-28 helicopters, Yak-130 combat trainers. Where does that stand? I mean, that's a major deal.
Years away. Russian production of their top-of-the-line aircraft is limited. They need every airframe they can get in Ukraine. So there's no way that Iran is going to come up on the priority list for Russian deliveries above the Russian army in Ukraine. So there are limits there. Because of their own vulnerabilities and their own constraints, both the Chinese and the Russians, although on paper they're allies of Iran, in practice, they haven't done that much to give Iran the capacity to fight Israel. And I don't believe that either of them wants a war with Israel at this point. Both of them are very vulnerable. The nightmare of the Chinese, which they keep talking about privately and publicly, is destabilization of their Muslim West of Xinjiang province, as well as destabilization of the Belt and Road countries through Muslim fundamentalism. That's what worries. That's their biggest worry, and they keep accusing the Central Intelligence Agency and the Americans of plotting to create a new arc of crisis and do terrible things to them, and so forth. The Chinese press is full of accusations that the United States was somehow behind Islamic fundamentalists in Bangladesh who participated in the overthrow of Sheikh Hasina earlier this month. So there's a limit to how much they want to let the Middle East blow up. That's an inherent vulnerability. Russia is now 20 or 25% Muslim. It's very hard to know to what extent Muslims are gaining on ethnic Russians demographically. There are many projections that Russia will have a 30% Muslim population by mid-century. They've had major terrorist incidents from Muslims, most recently at a prison in the Russian Caucasus. And the Russians are very cautious about the possibility of destabilizing the Middle East. Remember that Putin went into Syria in 2015 because he feared that the Syrian civil war would spill over into Russian territory, into the Muslim-majority Caucasus.
Kind of. I mean, kind of, except he also went in there to get a permanent naval base and to return victoriously to the Middle East after the Soviet Union was ousted from the Levant in 1982 during the Lebanon War by the Israeli Air Force. So I mean, he got a lot out of his partnership with Assad, and that was really what built his rising partnership with Iran as well, because they were both working together with Hezbollah to preserve Assad in power.
Yes, they wanted to preserve Assad in power because a Sunni-controlled Syria, controlled by Sunni jihadists, would be a threat to his southern flank. I don't know what Putin was thinking. I do know that he told members of the Israeli cabinet that the reason for his intervention in Syria was his fear of spillover of Muslim terrorism into Russia itself. That was certainly a major factor. So Israel has a lot of cards to play here. It's
with Russia, with both of them.
With both of them. Russia does not want a fight with Israel in Syria. The fight between the Israeli Air Force and the Russians in Syria could go either way. I don't know enough about the military details to make a prediction, but the Russians, from what I can tell, do not wish to find out, which is why it's still the case that the Russians stand down when the Israeli Air Force attacks Iranian-linked targets in Syria. So despite the overt alliance of Russia and Iran, there's still military cooperation in Syria. It's also the case that when the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu went to Tehran earlier this month, Asia Times reported exclusively, but I believe reliably, that Shoigu carried a letter from Putin to the Iranian government offering to mediate between Iran and Israel.
After the assassination attributed to Israel of Haniya earlier in the month.
That's correct. This is also a very interesting development. I mean, I doubt anyone will ever know the truth about how Haniya got assassinated, but there are a limited number of possibilities. One is that the Mossad has the best deep infiltration operation in Iran that any foreign intelligence service has ever had with any country in history. Another is that elements of the Iranian opposition assisted in the assassination. And a third is that the Iranian government itself, for whatever reason, was not particularly unhappy about getting rid of the guy. So it's interesting how limited the response of Iran and its proxies has been to the assassination. The papers were full of expectations that they'd have a regional Middle East war, massive attacks by Iran against Israel. Iran has done nothing from its own territory, and the attacks by Hezbollah this week were clearly delineated and measured, and almost entirely stopped by the Chinese are like iron filings on a piece of paper when you put a magnet underneath. They all stand up in the same direction. And when the line came out from Beijing that Israel was a bad entity, suddenly every poster on Weibo and other Chinese social media picked up anti-Semitic memes. It was disgusting to watch and very disappointing to know that. And I don't think they want that to happen. The problem is that Israel is caught in a great power conflict. Israel never wanted to pick a fight with China. Netanyahu made a number of trips there. Trade was going very well, a lot of scientific cooperation, a lot of Chinese investment in Israeli high tech. And then as the new Cold War between China and the United States intensified, Israel as an American ally was in the line of fire. So I think the main reason the Chinese are beating up Israel is not because they're inherently anti-Semitic. They never have been, and they have no reason to be. They have no Jews to hate, and to the extent there were Jews there, they got along with them. I think the reason is the simple fact that Israel is an American ally, and China and Israel are at daggers. China and the United States are at daggers drawn, and that's a rotten situation to be in. There's probably no remedy for it in the near term. But the Chinese have a very long view, Carolyn, and if you look at the long view, Iran and Turkey, who are the only Muslim countries that have viable high-tech industries and real economic potential, have grave problems. Both of them have are subject to rapid demographic decline. According to the Center United Nations projection, most probable outcome, both of them will lose about half of their working age population in the course of the century. Israel's working age population will double because Turkey's fertility rate is 1.5 children per female, Iran's is 1.6, Israel's is 3. And I know a lot of that is heredity, but the heredity are increasingly going to work. So let's assume that problem can be addressed. What that means, given the relative productivity, is that the economy of Israel by middle of the century will be larger than the economies of Iran and Turkey put together. And by the end of the century, Israel will be by far the dominant power in the Middle East. I went through those projections, just standard United Nations projections at a piece in Asia Times a couple of weeks ago. And a Pakistani commentator said, that's probably why the Saudis and the Emiratis want to link up with Israel. In the long view, Israel is the strong horse.
Okay, fascinating analysis there from David Goldman. Many points that I had not considered. Just read a 2016 book. It's called Public Intellectuals in the Global Arena, Professors or Pundits. And this book notes that the lure of public fame, power, and even wealth made available through the mass public audience leads to suspicions about the motives of public intellectuals. Are they first and foremost individuals devoted to truth, who turn their knowledge and talent to matters of public concern? Or are they individuals out for celebrity, power, and wealth? Right? A humble person such as myself, I am just a servant of the truth. I'm not in this for celebrity, power, and wealth. God forbid. Further analysis from this book. I love this insight. There is an inverse relation between the public side of the public intellectual and the intellectual side, meaning a super public intellectual is much more public than intellectual. A super intellectual public intellectual is not very public. Right, so David Brooks and the late Christopher Hitchens are much more public and much less intellectual, right? So if we think of public intellectuals as existing on a continuum with the intellectual, the knowledge base at one end, and the public base, both in scope and audience, at the other, right, we see that public intellectuals such as Paul Krugman of the New York Times lie somewhere midway between the generalists like David Brooks and specialist public intellectuals such as the health economists who consulted on the 2010 Obamacare reform. So Paul Krugman frequently speaks out far more generally on economic matters, on things in which he's not terribly knowledgeable, areas where he's going to lack the specialized knowledge of a health economist. So once we move into the era of the Enlightenment, right, once human society stopped being grounded in tradition, public intellectualism becomes important, right? Tradition is replaced by the conscious application of human intelligence to public life, right? The Enlightenment is a big believer in reason, and the people who do this are called public intellectuals. And so if you're on the left, you more fervently believe in rationalism replacing tradition. If you're on the right, you're less likely to believe in rationalism replacing tradition. Now, Burke and modern conservatism, Edmund Burke, arose largely in a negative reaction against this perceived attempt by the French secular intellectuals to remake society in the image of reason. But Burke and modern conservative thinkers are also public intellectuals. They also come before the public with a case based on knowledge and reason concerning the nature of society to oppose a certain type of abstract rationalism. So the left venerates reason, pure reason, abstract reason, much more than the right and traditionalists and conservatives do. So conservatives and trads will often try to make a reasoned, knowledgeable case against the rule of abstract reason. So liberal equality, right, consists in the claim to be considered as an individual rather than primarily as a member of a group or a clan when it comes to basic rights, right? Status before the law and freedom of opportunity. So we speak of equal rights, equality before law, and equal opportunity, but we should not be speaking of equal outcomes. So I'm quite fond of this David Goldman interview.
Israel certainly has challenges, but just in terms of raw potential, demographic and economic, Israel is gaining on its Muslim neighbors and will continue to gain unless some drastic change happens. But it's very difficult for me to see how that would happen, say, in Turkey or Iran. Iran is a declining power, demographically and economically and ecologically.
Well, I read your article on that in the Asian Times, and I recommended to our viewers that because Israel is an American ally, China and Russia are sort of striking out more aggressive.
Israel room to talk to Russia if that shooting war between the West and Russia. His biggest single reason is because Trump promised on the first day in office to call up Putin and find a way to settle the Ukraine war. That would immediately give Israel room to talk to Russia if that shooting war between the West and Russia were ended. In the case of China, things are more complicated because the United States is not reconciled to China's rise as a major power and the possibility that China might become a peer of the United States, or even in some respects, a more powerful country. We can't wrap our minds around that. We can't accept it. We don't like it. I personally don't like it.
Okay, victory over sin. Bye-bye.